These are some of the most disturbing confessions on the internet. From OP admitting to thoughts of digging up her dead parents, to a guy confessing to an extremely disgusting incident involving himself and his grandmother, along with murder confessions, confessions from predators, and admissions of watching extremely disturbing and illegal content online. So, without any further ado, let's begin. I'm a predator. I don't feel bad about it. A user who goes by the name GuiltyThrowaway83 made a post tagged with no regrets on the confession subreddit 10 years ago. His confession is edited, and the edit says that he doesn't want this to at all come off as something that he's proud of. His thoughts are undoubtedly evil. He says he's very well aware of that, and with that being said, he has never had any desire to act out on any of his impulses. Now, about the confession. He says that he's never done anything, and he would never. He's not a monster. With that being said, he confesses to being a predator. He also tells us that he's 29 years old, and that he's also attracted to women who are his age and older. He just can't stop himself from lusting after someone he shouldn't. He felt ashamed of these feelings for years, until one day he thought to himself, why am I bothering with all this guilt? He says that he's not hurting anyone, and it doesn't affect anyone except him. He also watches a lot of what he describes as legally CP, but not what people think of when you say CP. It's mostly old Strickham videos and pictures that he found on the internet, and that he never watched any professionally produced or amateur real CP. He states that it's serious abuse and truly evil, and that he'd report it if he saw it somewhere. He ends his confession by stating that all comments are welcome, including the ones from those who are going to tell him how terrible of a person he is. I keep a folder with pictures of dead girls on my computer. This confession was written by a user with a throwaway account 6 years ago. OP admits that he keeps a folder on his computer called Pictures of Dead Girls. It's not what one would think it is, but it's still terrible. Whenever he reads a news story about a girl getting murdered, he checks for photos to see if she's hot. If she is, he downloads her pics and adds them to his folder. He explains that it's not the girl's beauty that gets him off, even though they usually are beautiful. It's the thrill of realizing that a girl is more or less forgotten, except perhaps by the most aggrieved friends and family members of hers. Even they have to ease up on thinking about her constantly if they even hope to move on with their lives. She's remembered less and less by acquaintances, friends, mentors, anyone whose life she touched. When he's thinking about all of that, at that moment, he's one of the only people in the world who still thinks about her. And yet, as he dredges her memory out of the darkness, it's not to venerate her or celebrate her life, it's to desecrate her and make the whole affair some perverse monument to the fear and desperation she must have felt right before she ended. And then he finishes, I got off to gore and people being killed. Shared 7 years ago and tagged with remorse on Reddit's confession community, a user going by the name TMPNO4T confessed to being aroused by gore and people dying. In the confession, OP admits that while it may seem obvious to others, they only recently realized how abnormal this fixation is. They note that everyone has fetishes they would prefer to keep private, but they were beginning to understand that theirs was fundamentally different. OP states that they never felt guilt about it before. That changed after reading about the behaviors of certain killers, which made them realize how disturbing their own interests were and left them feeling deeply uncomfortable. They explained that a few years earlier, they had stumbled across videos depicting real deaths caught on camera. Although the footage was censored, OP felt a sense of exhilaration while watching. One video in particular stood out to them. It was linked in a description, and they liked it. The video, hosted on LiveLeak, showed a murder. They admit to using the video during private moments, and then actively searching for more content like it. Eventually, OP discovered BestScore and began using it frequently. They say they liked many forms of violent content. Around the same time, OP discovered Gudo and continued watching hentai of that genre alongside the other material. OP admits this behavior continued for several years before they stopped. They clarified that they did not stop out of guilt, but because they constantly felt as though people were watching them, even when they were alone. They say they wanted to confess because the realization left them feeling uneasy and disturbed by themselves. For context, Gudo is a Japanese genre that combines erotic elements with graphic violence. Since OP specifically mentions Gudo hentai, they are technically referring to Edo Gudo, which translates to erotic gore. 20 years ago, I murdered the ex-Nazi who tormented my father during the Holocaust. The confession begins with OP stating that, for legal reasons, he's going to keep things vague. His father survived the Holocaust and came to the United States. He had a pretty good career in the US, but he was a total wreck with multiple wives, children out of wedlock, alcoholism, and also abuse. Anyway, he was active in a number of Jewish American and Holocaust survivor groups. Somehow, through those groups, he learned that the guard who had tormented him at Buchenwald was living in a certain South American country. OP also notes that his dad might have possibly been essayed by the guard. OP remembers just being a kid and seeing his father sitting at his desk, writing letters to congressmen and international organizations about the guard, demanding that he would be taken into custody. Nothing ever came of it. OP went to college, and at one point, he had the opportunity to go to the country where the same guard lived to conduct research and assist his professor. While he was there, OP did some research of his own and became fairly certain that he knew where the guard was. Keep in mind, this took place during a time where there was no internet and corruption was even worse than it is now. After graduating, OP went into finance. Less than a year into working at his firm, he was offered a position in the same country where the guard lived. He accepted the offer without hesitation and immediately began making plans. OP does not explain how the murder was carried out. He only states that he had money, and money could get a lot of things done in the world. When the time came, he did what he did. It was messy and not as satisfying as he had imagined. He planned to make a big, self-righteous speech, but the guard did not speak English. OP repeated his father's name several times, and the guard began to cry. He seemed to understand who OP was and tried to plead with him, but it was to no avail. Afterward, OP was paranoid for an entire year. He doesn't think he slept at all for 3 or 4 months. However, it was a different time, and people died in that country frequently. OP stole a few of the guard's belongings to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. He never returned to the neighborhood and never heard anything from the police. OP told his father what he had done, but his father was too far gone, drinking bottle after bottle. OP states that he doesn't know why he did it. He was young and wanted to be some kind of badass action hero. At the time, he saw himself as an international man of intrigue rather than a nerd. OP's father died a few years later, and OP never told any of his siblings about the murder. He did confess to his mother. She just cried, and they never spoke about it again. OP has told his wife and his business partner about what he did, and they were far more supportive and understanding than he feels he deserves. He says that he doesn't have much sympathy for the man he murdered. If the guard had been shot by rebelling prisoners during the war, OP doesn't think it would have been all that different. He's mostly angry at himself for risking his future and wasting his 20s. His 20s should have been better, instead of being spent miserable and paranoid, believing that what he had done would somehow make up for the sadness he grew up with. In a comment under his post, OP says that he will be deleting his account. He explains that his sympathy for the man he killed only extends as far as the sympathy he would have for any human being. The comment is quite long, but the gist is that he regrets being foolish and believing that what he did would change anything. I killed my little brother. Yikes666 is a throwaway account that shared the following confession 11 years ago. OP begins by stating that they will not drag out the post any longer than necessary, but it needs to be known that when they and their brother were younger, they used to go on what they called adventures. These adventures involved visiting places like construction sites, tunnels, and forests. Everyone gets the idea. Their parents were calm, and the children only told them that they were going to the forest behind their house, so they had no idea about the more dangerous things they were getting up to. The brothers often came across a fast-flowing river and would mess around, pretending to throw each other in. One day, OP's brother ended up falling in, or rather being pushed in, but he had terrible balance. OP states that what they did was not much of a push. They had a stick and went to help him by offering it to him. While helping, they were laughing so hard that they could barely hold the stick steady. When he went to grab it, they pulled back just out of his reach. As they said themselves, they found the whole thing really funny. At that point, they could see that he was in serious trouble. Their brother was frantically trying to push himself above the surface of the water. OP states that they were almost doubled over with laughter at that point. They could hear him screaming for help, so in their most heroic voice, they said, "Don't worry, I'll get our parents." Then they started running away, but only until they were out of his sight. After that, they walked away on purpose, doing an exaggerated and comically slow walk for their own amusement. Eventually, they ran around in a few circles to make themselves look out of breath, then heroically ran into their house, where their mother was with a group of her friends. Their mother angrily told them to go away. Since their mother was irritated, OP was tempted to leave and ended up doing so. They briefly thought about how they could later innocently tell their mother that their brother had died in the river because she did not want to be interrupted. OP ultimately decided against it though, since it would have been a bit too strange. Instead, they put on their best act and theatrically panted, making themselves look out of breath as they explained that their brother had fallen into the river. OP did not say how long ago he had fallen in because they were worried their mother might rush to rescue him too soon. They were also glad they were pretending to be completely out of breath because they were smiling. To this day, OP says they cannot deliver bad news without a huge grin appearing on their face. Luckily, people usually assume it's just their way of coping with grief. Back to the story. All of the adults in the room, including their mother, who had a bad leg, rushed out to try to save their brother. They ran to a completely different part of the river because OP deliberately led them to the wrong way. OP was still struggling not to laugh. When they could not find their brother and realized he was not there, their mother started crying. OP awkwardly describes how they once again got to pretend to be the hero, leading their mother's friends farther along the river. One of the adults stayed with her, and OP recalls thinking that she was a horrible mother for leaving her youngest son to drown while she stopped to cry. They spent the next 3 hours before it got too dark, and so they started to freak out. What if he's okay and he tells on them? OP made it look like they were trying to help, but what if he suspects them of purposefully ditching him? Their dad came back home, and they stayed up all night in the kitchen while some locals and the local emergency services searched with flashlights. By this time, they were worried their brother was alive, and he was going to snitch on them and tell the police about them. Seeing how upset OP looked, their parents tried to comfort them and make sure they were okay. OP loved the attention. They even managed to shed some fake tears. They realized later that their parents weren't out and helping the search teams because they wanted to make sure OP was okay. When it was light again the next morning, OP realized they must have fallen asleep. They were alone in their room and went downstairs to find their parents crying. Their brother had been found just after dawn. Supposedly, his body had been washed up on a sandy area of the riverbank. His face and body were badly cut up. OP notes that this made things especially difficult for the family because they were Catholic and an open casket was expected. After that, OP was given almost anything they wanted by their parents, although they also became extremely protective. Teachers and extended family members treated OP much more kindly as well. They were given extra time during exams and were excused from trouble at school that would normally have led to expulsion. OP believes their mother likely felt intense guilt for having been so relaxed and for allowing both children to go out alone. That is essentially the confession. OP says that they did not actually kill their brother, the river did. Even so, OP admits that they always wish they had, unless someone considers this to count. They explain that the strange part is that they never truly planned for him to die. They say that they had always wanted to kill someone deliberately, and it feels unfair to them that it technically was not their doing. That, they claim, is the real reason they decided to share the story. For as long as they can remember, they wanted to kill someone ideally by choking them with their hands. They just want to know how it feels, like how they want to know what sex is like. OP states it's hard to explain, but they think all men want to kill, and that's why people join the army and so on. Hence why they are just being honest. OP ends their confession with a cold TLDR. They killed their little brother and are still not quite sure why. I knew my husband was a murderer and didn't say anything for a year. 7 years ago, a Reddit user going by the username MyOrMcCory2 posted her confession on the Confession subreddit. When MyOrMcCory2 was 18 years old, she married her husband Joe. They spent the summer together, and this was during the 1980s. She got pregnant, and since she came from an Irish and Catholic home, she kept the baby. She says she was terrified of Joe, and that he was a mob guy, or at least wanted to be one really badly. She also tells us that his family was very low level, and so was Joe. Nobody wanted him because he was too young, but he was always trying to prove himself. OP says that he actually wasn't so bad during the first few years. She never knew what he did with his family, but he brought home a lot of money, and he was sweet to her. Her dad always idolized the mob and told her stories about them and how they were great guys who kept the peace in the neighborhood. Because of this, OP never thought that what her husband was doing might be bad. She knew it was a crime, but she thought of it as something more glamorous. She met all the other wives of his crew members and got to know some of his family. They were all nice and respectful people. Sometimes she thinks back to how stupid and uneducated she was. She was just so impressionable and ignorant. Once, she overheard her husband talking about killing someone. She didn't know who. She knew that she would never eavesdrop on his family. But it just happened that time. After she overheard that, she started eavesdropping every single time. All she had to do was leave her door slightly open, and she could hear them when they were in the living room. After a week, she heard them talking about the killing again. She overheard him tell his brother that he had done it, and he was finished. OP has zero idea who he killed. All she knows is what she heard. She didn't go to the cops, and she didn't divorce him or bring it up to him. She acted like everything was normal because she was scared. There was a period of time when she cried every night because she wanted to take their son and run away to California. She didn't leave for a whole year, and eventually the memory of listening in on him faded away. She tried to justify what her husband did by reminding herself that he and his family were good guys, so maybe whoever he killed was a bad person. OP again states that she can't believe how ignorant and dumb she was. She never eavesdropped again, that was for sure. Eventually, her husband was taken down by the police. They caught him for a murder, but she doesn't know if it was the same murder or another one. She has a suspicion it might be the murder that she overheard since it fits in with the timeline, but she's not sure. The police took nearly everyone in her husband's family, his 3 brothers, his father, and his cousins. They talked to OP and they asked what she knew. She just told them that she didn't know anything. The other wives gave OP advice, and they told her that she could just tell them what she knew so that it didn't seem like she was lying. They advised her not to give any specifics about anything serious. OP's husband went to prison, and he died there a few years later. When he was in jail, OP told him that she knew he had done terrible things, and she was going to divorce him. That was final. She still holds a certain amount of guilt for not saying anything for an entire year, but she was just terrified. After her husband went to prison, she wanted to change and improve herself. She moved away from her town, and she cut contact with everyone she met through her husband. She went to college and got a degree and a well-paying job. She still works in her chosen field. I have watched CP. A newer confession posted 2 months ago on the Confession subreddit was shared by the user FarNeat5085. The title was, I have watched CP, and it attracted a lot of attention. OP begins his confession by stating that he wants everyone's forgiveness and that he is truly sorry. He says that he is also drunk, but he will try to keep his confession and everything else as unbiased as possible. He explains that he feels like he could write this out 1,000,000 times and still never fully or accurately portray his story. Moving on, he informs readers that he is an 18-year-old Irish male. As a child, he says he was always a bit strange and less empathetic or understanding. He was eventually diagnosed with Asperger's, a form of autism. He also states that he had unsupervised access to computers from around the age of 7, which led him to become very familiar with them. When he started secondary school at around 13 or 14 years old, he began watching CP. He did not feel that it was immoral, but about a year later, it started to dawn on him. He tried to stop but realized he was addicted, so he switched to animated stuff. In his mind, the animated content felt more moral than real material. By this point, he was already addicted to pornography in general. He stopped watching real CP entirely by the time he was 15, but he still struggles with his pornography addiction to this day. He says he has managed to quit for months at a time, but it always comes back. He has not watched any real CP in 3 years, although he admits that he still watches animated content every few months. He acknowledges how disturbing this is, and adds that one thing he will say for himself is that he rarely feels any attraction in real life and would never put someone in harm's way. He says this is a hill he would die on with certainty. He then asks the readers of his confession several questions. Is this a life worth living? Can he ever be forgiven? What if he joined a tactical force to help save children in third world countries? Ultimately, he asks whether his life is truly worth living. The comments under the confession are complicated. Many advise OP to seek professional help, and he admits that he has reached out to anonymous support groups. OP says he is terrified of growing older and becoming a predator. He swears that he would rather disappear from Earth rather than harm a child. He also says that he is afraid he can never live a normal life or have a family because of this, and that fear deeply affects him. He does not want to turn out like the predators he despises. Besides this, the comments were trying to be helpful and find resources for OP since he was open to help and truly regretful and apologetic. I found a dead body in high school and never told anyone. This confession was shared 6 years ago by the user ThrowMeAwayJPEG. He provides us with some quick backstory, informing us that it was his junior year in high school, and at the same time, he was living with a really good friend of his. It was around 6-ish a.m., and he got out of bed and decided to make some coffee and pack up some lunch. On that particular day, his friend and he decided to walk. It was about an hour long, and school started at 7:30 a.m., so they headed out. There were many paths to their school, so they did a coin flip on which one to take. His buddy decided to cut across the street sooner rather than later, as the school would be on the opposite side of the street, and they continued down the road. To paint a picture, this was a fairly large street in a somewhat forested area, and on the side they were walking, there happened to be large ditches with bushes. He was on one side of the street, and his friend was on the other side, with the ditch. There was a small clearing in it. His friend nudged him and whispered to him frantically. He had poor hearing, so he heard his friend say something about a dead bunny. There were a lot of bunnies, so it was not shocking that some died. But his friend was really persistent, and OP could tell that he didn't really register what his friend had told him. Eventually, it clicked, and at first, he did not believe him. His friend then pointed it out to him. About 7 to 8 feet from where they were, there was a man lying unconscious, wearing clothes, in the ditch. He looked pale, was not breathing, and had blood across his chest and hands. They had seen a lot of homeless people and a lot of drunks and druggies, but nothing quite like this. OP also assures us that the man was not breathing. OP and his friend both calmly walked away. They were still in shock and comprehending what they had just seen. They didn't even consider calling the police because, God forbid, they get apprehended. So they just left him there and never told anyone. On their walk back home, there were some cops who had the area blocked off, and well, they just walked straight back home. OP can't say he was traumatized or anything, but he did feel guilty for leaving the dead man's corpse there and not doing something about it. He felt bad that someone else had to take the responsibility, and he couldn't have done it himself. OP and his friend never told a soul, but now Reddit knows and holds his shame. I essayed my incapacitated grandma. Holy fuck. A Reddit user going by the name, Oh God I'm Sorry, you should be, shared his confession 13 years ago. His grandmother had been in a home since the time he was 10 years old. Her health had been on the decline, both physically and mentally, for quite some time. By the time he was 14 years old, her memory and general mental health had degraded to the point where she was basically unable to communicate with anyone. His grandmother would lose track of who she was talking to only after a minute or so of conversation. She would hardly make a coherent sentence by the time he was 15. At that point, she couldn't even leave her room without another person. She was also 83 years old. By the time he had entered middle school, it was clear that there was just no hope of recovery for her. Her overall health only took a downward spiral. Back when OP was 14, his grandma was nearing the end of having any ability to function. His mom wanted him to spend more time with her. It was important to her that he stayed with his grandma as long as he could. So every Tuesday after school, he had to visit his grandmother. Sometimes his mother would go with him, but usually he would go alone. OP knows that this is messed up, but he wants to explain something. He would sit in a room with an elderly lady, aka his grandma, who couldn't even recognize who he was, and she would blabber about things that were completely nonsensical. She was senile, and it scared him. It scared him into doing things that he knew were wrong at the time. He was really stressed and scared, and he guessed he just let bad things take him over. It's hard for him to talk about what he did. He would try to type it out, but he was crying at the moment. He was recounting all of the things he did, and it made him feel sick. He literally had a pain that felt like part of his body was just taken, and his guilt was horrible. So he elaborates. His grandmother was just sitting on her bed, and he just went for it. Things escalated from there, and they cannot be talked about on YouTube. The gist of it is that he was essaying her. After a couple of years, he finally realized how messed up it was. His grandmother couldn't even talk anymore, and she passed away when he was 17. OP had to speak at her funeral, and he cried and dry-heaved at the podium. Everyone thought it was because he couldn't handle the grief, but really, it was because he thought that he deserved to go instead of her. He wondered what was wrong with him. He was a messed up kid in a lot of ways. He probably needed therapy, but he felt like this was the worst thing that he did. He abused her. He wondered how he could fix it himself. Nobody knew that this happened, and now he was opening himself up for judgment. He felt that he deserved to die. He wanted someone to tell him that he deserved to because he needed to die. There was no other way to make things right. I could have saved my bully's life, but I let him die. 13 years ago, a Reddit user who goes by the name of The Sheriff's Kid confessed to letting their bully die. OP begins the admission by informing us that he grew up in a fairly small town. From elementary school and all the way through high school, OP had the exact same bully that he would call D for his confession. D would always pick on him and beat him up whenever he got the chance. He, for whatever reason, just wanted to make OP's life hell and miserable. During their junior year of high school, they both got their driver's license at around the same time, and they both drove their cars down the same two-lane county road to get home every day. D would try to race OP or swerve into his lane to get him to slam on his brakes. Sometimes he'd throw something at their car. He also did this up throughout their senior year of high school until he died. It was 7 years ago. They were both driving home from school, and D was once again being a butt who was trying to race OP home. On that day, OP decided to try to beat him and keep him from getting in front of them. OP was approaching a sharp corner and slowed down, allowing him the chance to pass. At the same time, another car with a drunk driver was coming from the opposite direction, and it lost control during the turn. The car slammed into D's car on the right side, hitting him when he was right in the driver's side. D lost control of his car and went down the embankment and into a tree. OP swerved to avoid the crash, then OP kept driving. He felt like he deserved it, and he should pass away for all the torment he caused him. D had suffered multiple injuries and internal bleeding. It wasn't another 30 minutes before another vehicle came along and stopped. It was OP's dad that stopped, and he was a county sheriff. He knew who it was when he stopped. He had dealt with D's dad a few times from being drunk. He knew who D was and that D picked on OP. He still tried to save D's life, but it was too little too late. D died in OP's dad's arms. OP never told anybody that he witnessed the accident and that he could have gotten help for D sooner. D could still be alive if he had. Even though he hated him, OP wished he would have saved him. OP didn't know he would hate himself more for not doing anything. I almost killed my mother. About 1 year ago, under a different subreddit, someone asked the question, what's the worst thing you have done but won't confess to anyone in real life? A Redditor going by the name of Yasoki begins their confession by stating that when they were about 8 or 9 years old, their mother would get awfully wasted while their father went away for work trips. Yasoki states that it wasn't happening often, and they can only remember 3 times it happened, which were really bad. They recount how the worst time was when their mother went ham on a bottle of Allen's coffee brandy. Their mother was really mad at their brother, who was about 10 years old at the time, and she threw a kettle of tea at him. Yasoki tells us that their brother wasn't seriously hurt, just a little burnt and bruised. It definitely would have been a lot worse, but Yasoki was mad at their mother for doing it. Yasoki then describes how they sneaked into their parents' bedroom and found a bottle of sleeping pills. They grabbed a small handful, thinking it was just enough so that their mother wouldn't be able to taste it. They wanted to put their mother to sleep so that she would leave their brother and them alone. They crushed the pills in a bag with a cup because that was how they saw someone on TV do it. After that, they sprinkled the powder into their mother's brandy. Later, their mother passed out in her chair. Yasoki got scared and tried to wake her up, but it looked like she wasn't breathing. They then called the neighbor over, who came, and she called an ambulance, which took the mother to the hospital. At the hospital, they found the pills in her system. Yasoki never confessed to the pills, and their mother couldn't deny she took them because she was drunk. So, Child Protective Services were involved. Yasoki and their brother had to stay at their aunt's place for a couple of weeks, and their mother quit drinking after that incident. Fast forward to present time. Yasoki tells us that now, 26 years later, their mother and their father are happily retired. They explained that their mother didn't drink when their father was around because he almost died when he was in his early 20s. He was drinking and fell through ice, so he hasn't touched a lick of alcohol ever since. Their father was rightfully mad about what happened, and they were close to getting a divorce due to the incident, but Yasoki thinks that their father sympathized with their mom and reflected on all the times she herself had to put up with him when he was a raging alcoholic. So, he gave her another chance. Yasoki admits that they never told anyone, not even their brother, about this. They didn't even know what they were doing, and they could have killed their mom. Considering Yasoki's situation and how they were nothing but a child, everything that happened was just sad. The comments under Yasoki's confession sympathized with them and were apologetic towards everything that happened and all the trauma they went through. Among the comments, Yasoki states that they now have a very healthy relationship with their siblings as well as their parents. They state that what happened was very traumatic, but they're thankful they didn't grow up with abusive alcoholics their whole life. They mentioned that some people have it way worse growing up, and they overall had a happy childhood. Fucking Jeff over. Under an Ask Reddit post made 9 years ago, a Redditor asked about what secrets people are hiding from their family and will take to their graves. The first disturbing confession comes from a Reddit user going by the username F***ing Jeff Over, so he will be referred to as Screwing Jeff Over to go along with guidelines. The confession begins with a user stating that he's a man using a throwaway account. He then admits how he got with his now wife, who he calls Sarah, securing his relationship with her through months of planned lies, blackmail, and deceit. Screwing Jeff Over introduces his now ex-girlfriend as Deb. He tells us that Sarah was his ex-girlfriend's friend at the time. He explains that years ago, when he was together with Deb and Sarah, he watched Sarah unlock the pin on her phone numerous times. She did it to take pictures, so he was observing her again and again and then saved her pin on a note. He then explains how months later, Sarah and Deb were at his place again, but this time at the pool. Sarah left her phone indoors, and screwing Jeff over, put in her pin, and then, as he described it, he hit the big jackpot. The jackpot consisted of intimate and explicit pictures as well as videos of both Sarah and her boyfriend at the time, who's called Jeff. He gained access to all her chats, and he described his girlfriend Deb as hot, but then creepily added that Sarah was a fat chick who worked her butt off and became an 11 out of 10. He also adds that with the so-called goldmine of pictures and videos that he found, he concocted a slow plan, a very slow plan, to get with Sarah. He slowly broke things off with Deb, and then he kept in touch with Sarah. He created an alter ego online, an identity going by the name of Vanessa. He worked on this online identity for months, making it look as real as possible. Vanessa started following Sarah on all social media platforms, and Sarah accepted all friend requests. The online identity, Vanessa, then blackmailed the boyfriend Jeff. She gave him 2 days to stop talking to Sarah or his intimate pictures would get exposed. This scared Jeff away and he left Sarah. Vanessa then tried to threaten Sarah too by saying she'll leak her pictures, but faced resistance from Sarah. OP realized that his threats wouldn't work, so he decided to switch tactics up. He made Vanessa disappear for a couple of months until he could get Sarah's phone in his hands again. One day, Sarah was over at his place and then happened to lose her phone. OP pretended he found it and he handed it to Sarah the next day. Before giving Sarah her phone back, he installed a spy app that allowed him to keep track of everything on her phone. A few weeks later, the online persona, Vanessa, reappeared again, this time armed with private information and details about Sarah's conversations with people. While tracking Sarah's reactions and her suspicions about Vanessa, OP took it a step further by making it show that Vanessa wasn't real. He then subtly brags about how all of his friends know him as being quite tech literate. After that, he tells us about how one day he was talking to Sarah again, and she broke down crying. Sarah told him about how she had long-distance sexted a guy, and now she was being blackmailed for it by a stranger who she didn't know. She asked him for help. And long story short, OP made it look like Jeff was Vanessa. He twisted the narrative, making it seem like Jeff had created Vanessa to blackmail Sarah into doing messed up sexual things for him. Believing that Vanessa was created by Jeff, Sarah left Jeff. Screwing Jeff over then brags by saying Sarah left him, and guess who was the hero? Me. I caught Vanessa. Sarah was now safe because of me. He then added that he blackmailed Jeff again, and after that, Vanessa officially disappeared, closing the curtains by making it seem like Jeff was the online person known as Vanessa. OP then talks about how Sarah and he had this tragedy that they overcame together. He informs us that they started dating not long after. Sarah was never going to go back to long-distance dating, so she decided to date locals who were near her. 4 years later, they were married. People were unsettled by OP's insane confession. Not only had he manipulated, broken up, and blackmailed his now wife and her then boyfriend, but he also admitted to doing all of this without any remorse, which raised suspicion in the thread under his comment. One commenter said, "No way. If way, you are going to hell." OP responded to that by saying, "Meh, it's okay. I can't see myself loving anyone else. I would do it all over again." The rest of the comments were a mix of normal users who called out his psychotic behavior, combined with other users who actually supported it. In one comment, OP admits that he's a lawyer by saying, "Not really, I'm a lawyer, so I guess manipulation is my job." This adds more fuel to the fire due to the simple fact that because he's a lawyer, supposedly, he should understand just what crimes he's committing. His blackmail would count as extortion if he were caught. However, keep in mind that each country has its own laws regarding extortion. More importantly, how he framed himself as a hero by claiming to have helped Sarah with Jeff, and then talking about how they finally had a tragedy they overcame together, was a true manipulation tactic. He broke Sarah and Jeff up, threatened both Jeff and Sarah, and tried to extort them. And then he took advantage of Sarah by being there for her when she was going through something traumatic, which he set up. I tried to poison my father. Another unfortunate case of a post was made almost a year ago on the subreddit Illegal Advice. OP begins her post by telling us that her father is mad at her, and she won't disclose for what reason. She then says it's really dumb and awkwardly admits that she tried to kill him afterwards, to put it gently. She tried to take him out to avoid being potentially abused both physically and mentally by him. Most of the comments under her post were trolling her and telling her that she's going to go to jail. Many people jokingly asked her if she's still alive, and only some actually showed concern. Sometime later, she gives us an update. In her update, she writes that she's fine and she didn't go to jail. She informs us that for some reason, her father is fine too. Literally, all that happened was that he got pneumonia, but he was alright within a week and didn't die. She says that since then, she has reached out to get therapy and realized that what she did could have thrown her in prison, and she was being incredibly stupid. She thanks everyone for their concern and then says that she's doing okay, just not mentally. She claims that she's fine otherwise and just knows she won't try anything like this again. In her second update, she addresses all of the people who told her that she's going to go to jail for trying to poison her father. She does this by telling them that she was desperate and off of her pills, and no, he did not taste the bleach at all. She then also says that she got the bleach from the Dollar Tree too, so that might also be why he couldn't taste it, basically implying that it was cheap, so it's unlikely to be as strong as regular bleach. In her third update, she tells everyone to not call Child Protective Services nor the police. She tells people that they'll make everything so much worse for her, and she begs everyone to please not do anything. She says she'll deal with it, and then adds that she shouldn't have gone onto Reddit for her problems. A quick look at the comments on her profile, the most recent ones of which were made 7 months ago, revealed that she hates her father. She still tells us that getting rid of him wouldn't bother her much, yet it's not her right to do that. She says it's illegal and morally wrong and tells us that karma will get him eventually. Hurting him would result in just hurting her grandma too, and she'd hate that. A user on Reddit commented, advising her to talk to her therapist about her father's abuse. They sympathize with her, and they said they understand that she felt scared and recognized that what she did was wrong. They pointed out how it was good that she realized her mistake and wanted to fix it quickly because she didn't truly want her father to die. Another comment from her reveals that she can't talk to the therapist about the issue. This is because if Child Protective Services came, her father could just lie since she has no bruises or real evidence against him. She tells us that she's waiting until she turns 18 so that she can just leave. In the meantime, she has been prescribed antidepressants, but has mentioned this to her friends, so they gave her good advice after she opened up. A man who hit and ran in California. A post asking about what the most disturbing confession people have seen on Reddit was made 7 months ago. With almost 10,000 upvotes and over 3,000 comments, one comment on that post was from a user going by the name Son of Robot 8, and it stood out the most. Son of Robot 8 talked about how a week ago there was a man who had admitted to hitting and taking the life of a young woman in California some years back. He states that this was told in the comment section. The man's reasoning for saying anything about it was that the statute of limitations was up, so nothing could be done about it. He even named the intersection of the two streets where the accident had happened. Coincidentally, someone else replied to his comment with an article regarding the whole accident, since they remembered reading about it way back. They also knew the intersection and the two streets that the other man had mentioned during his admission. This caught the attention of many, and Son of Robot 8 tried to find the original post where this was all confessed, yet he couldn't. Luckily for us, he then edited his comment with more information for us. Another user who goes by JPN Dude helped him with finding the comment thread to the disturbing confession, and Son of Robot 8 linked it. Upon tapping the link, the comment was said to be removed by a moderator, and the account of the man who hit the woman and ran was deleted. Many of the comments, which are still visible on the post today, are calling out the horrible driver and cursing him out, and rightfully so. Son of Robot 8 also added a link to the article talking about the woman who was hit. Opening the link and reading through the article reveals that the situation is even worse than many initially thought. The victim in question was only 19 years old and a mother. Not only did the driver hit her and take her life away at such a young age, but he also hurt her 1-year-old baby girl during the accident. After doing some digging around the internet, some screenshots of what the mysterious driver had confessed were shared on different social media platforms. His username on Reddit was discovered, and he went by the name Jagatai Khan. Through those screenshots, it can be read how he confesses to running over a woman and her kid in California in '96. He states he doesn't remember the specific city, but he'll never forget it was the intersection between Van Owen Street and Louise Avenue. He states that he thinks the mom died, but he doesn't know what happened to her kid. Her kid, who we now know was a 1-year-old at the time. Adding to his confession, and as aforementioned, he coldly states that he's only telling us this because the statute of limitation has already passed. Reading just how cold and detached his comment is truly shows you how much of a monster a person can be. To make matters worse, everything that is known so far appeared to match the article. In the article, it was written that witnesses claimed he was drunk while driving, and some Redditors asked if he really was drunk. He confirmed that he indeed was. He also says he was more high than drunk, adding that he was on a lot of junk back then. One user called him out for his lack of sympathy and asked if it was on purpose. Jagatai Khan responded by saying that it wasn't, but it had been so long since it had happened, so it's just like a whisper of a memory. When pressed further about how detached he was about the situation, someone brought up the child whose mother's life he took away, and he responded by stating that it's been over 30 years. He coldly stated that the child most likely has children of its own. He says he has justified himself, rotted with guilt, and had sleepless nights, and he's an old man now, and he's waiting to die at any moment. He adds that he can't change what he did, and California doesn't send people to prison just because of a confession. He also mentions that his health alone would render him incompetent to stand trial. In another comment, he also adds that he was too high on various types of drugs to even notice what he had done. He informs us that he only knew what happened the day after the accident when he saw blood dried on his bumper. After that, he says that he was filled with guilt and paranoia for a couple of months. He moved to the Northeast for 7 months and lived out of the country for some years after. Some Reddit users stated that they have informed authorities about the thread. Whether this was someone messing around and pretending to be a killer for attention, or really the man behind the murder himself, the internet was not going to forgive nor forget it. After taking a closer look at his profile and the comments he leaves, I've managed to gather that he's a man in his 50s who's married. On a subreddit that asks people what secrets they've been hiding from their partner, he reveals that he's been married to his wife for over 30 years, and she still doesn't know how he accidentally took a life when he was young. A commenter there asked him, "What happened? I feel like she would probably understand if she'd known your character for this long. Are you sure you're not just feeling a deep guilt and assuming that she would blame you?" And to this, he responded with, "I was inebriated and driving." He says he hasn't told her because this isn't an "I flashed a security guard once" or "I sucked you-know-what in high school" confession. This is a type of "I'm a murderer" confession. He says that he can barely live with it, so how could she, knowing that she had kids with a killer? Despite the clues he leaves, which do refer to the incident revolving the 19-year-old mother, there is no way of truly verifying if it's indeed him or just some weirdo on the internet. No matter how many comments you read or how hard you look at his profile, it's difficult to really decipher if he's being genuine. And if he really is genuine, then it's truly scary how a man can be so cold and detached. The way he's flaunting what he did so openly is what causes people to really suspect that he's a troll. After all, how could a human being really be this evil, so openly and out for the whole internet to see? He never showed any real remorse. Sadly, there are no updates regarding this case, arrests, or any suspects. The real identity of the driver who hit the 19-year-old mother was never found. Whether the man on Reddit who's saying that he's the driver is being honest remains a mystery. My father was involved with my sister. In a post made 3 years ago, a user going by the name Maddie Moody shared an unsettling admission involving her 71-year-old father and her 25-year-old sister. Her confession begins by informing us that she's a 25-year-old woman, and then she tells us the ages of her father and sister, 71 and 25. She also informs us that her father has 10 kids, and her 25-year-old sister is actually her mother's oldest child and in no way related to their father, making her sister his stepchild. OP's sister will be referred to as L for the post. OP tells us that her sister is not right in the head, claiming that she'd go crazy at the drop of a hat. She lives in her own world and is very mean and selfish. OP's dad has been in L's life since L was only 5 years old. According to OP, L flirted with their father in front of everyone, including their mother. Their mother apparently wasn't worried and said she had nothing to worry about. At some point, L started talking about wanting to have children while she was still young. Of course, OP and L's mother tried to talk her out of it. She reminded L that she's too reckless and too selfish to have children, yet L revealed that she was pregnant at 20 years old. By the time everyone knew of her pregnancy, L would stay up late with their father and suspiciously whisper to him in the living room at night. During this time, OP was still in high school, in her senior year, so she would stay up late studying. She tells us that Elle and their father would suspiciously stop talking whenever OP left her room, and they would pretend they weren't talking to each other. It seemed strange at the time, but OP didn't think much of it. By the time Elle had her baby, OP had graduated and got a job so that she could help support her sister and her niece. Their parents weren't rich, so they couldn't afford to support another mouth to feed and all the expenses that came with the new baby. OP and Elle's mom eventually mentioned how the baby really looked like OP when she was little. And again, OP didn't really think much of it because it was innocent at the time. For a month or two, everyone went on about their business. OP helped with the baby, took care of it, and Elle just did whatever she wanted. OP tells us that Elle was as selfish and reckless as their mother was afraid she would be. Anytime OP came back from work, she'd find Elle on her phone while the baby was left unattended and screaming. She'd then have to pick up the baby and soothe her. This went on until OP left their house when she was 19 years old. Going to work and then coming back to look after the baby every day was her routine until she had gone. Strangely enough, Elle would tell her daughter to refer to OP's father as Dad, when in reality, she was supposed to refer to him as her grandfather. This left OP upset since clearly her niece was supposed to refer to her grandfather as Grandpa, not as Dad. Also, apparently, he ended up putting her on his social security number to get money for her. The whole thing was just really sketchy. So, when OP was 20 years old, she pretended to do an ancestry test with her father and her niece. In reality, she was doing a paternity test. Within a week, the results came back, and they were positive, stating that her dad was also indeed the father of her niece. Whew. After this, OP and her mother moved out of the house, and her father disowned her because she was the one who found out and exposed the truth. According to OP, her father ended up sweet-talking her mother and making up with her. OP reveals that Elle has 2 kids during this time. The first one is the 5-year-old one, which OP looked after, and the second one is only 2 years old, both of them being girls. OP ends her post with, "So now I have sister nieces." At this time, there are no comments on OP's post. It's disgusting how OP and Elle's father still had a whole relationship with Elle, despite quite literally being in her life since she was 5 years old. He raised her as his child, so to think that he went on to have 2 kids with her is just, yeah. I think about murder at least once a day. Posted on the confession community by a now deleted account, 12 years ago, a Reddit user confessed that he thinks about murder at least once a day. He began his admission by claiming that he has never been in a physical fight. He has a very short list of enemies, and he says that they are all very worthy of his hate, basically trying to assure everyone of this. He admits that he constantly daydreams about scenarios where he's justified in taking someone out. He says that he has no desire to take out an innocent person, but he wishes that sometimes someone would just treat him or a loved one badly enough to make him feel validated in taking their life. He likes to carry sharp and heavy objects around, just in case he ever has to take out someone, or one of his so-called enemies confronts him. When he was younger and less stable, his number one fear wasn't that he'd take out someone, but more so that he'd go to prison for it. He says that he spent years dropping subtle comments about it here and there to family members, friends, and therapists, all just to make him appear more mentally unstable than he really is, just in case he ever had to stand trial for murder. He confesses that when he gets angry nowadays, he doesn't raise his voice, punch walls, or throw things. He just bottles it up until he starts laughing hysterically. He also says that he believes he would benefit from therapy, and he adds that he is on medication. We come to learn that he's an adult with a family, but he's just a very unstable person who's not really safe for others. For the 3rd time in his confession, he adds the words, "I assure you," and then says he doesn't want to kill anyone, but at the same time, if it happened, then he'd enjoy it and want nothing more than to live in that moment forever. He then adds some disturbing things that he'd do. He says that those things appeal to him, but he doesn't know why, and he wishes it wasn't this way. He ended his confession with an unfortunate, "It is what it is." In a comment right under his post, he adds more, mentioning a little something about his list of enemies. In short, they're all people he thinks about roughly once per day, yet he hasn't spoken to them in years. He then types out a long murder scenario inspired by shows he's watched. The comment is unfortunately a tad too explicit for me to recap, but let's just say that it involves assault, humiliation, and murder. The identity of the Redditor remains unknown, and since the account was deleted, there are no updates. I killed 2 people and feel nothing. This confession was posted by a throwaway account user 12 years ago. A Redditor in the confession community confessed to having murdered 2 people and not feeling anything about it. To clear the air, OP begins by informing everyone that this was not some ploy. The murder was not planned and he was just at the wrong place during the wrong time. He says he acted purely on instinct to protect himself. This is also something that happened years ago, but still haunts him to this day. On to the confession. OP explains that he was a junior in high school at the time, and he had just gotten out of a class on a Friday when their older brother called him. His older brother was taking his best friend, named Chris, kayaking that weekend, and he wanted to know if OP would come too. OP drove home as fast as he could and met up with his brother to load up the kayaks. They left their home at about 4:30 in the afternoon. After driving for 5 hours on the interstate, they finally exited and drove to a gas station to fill the car up. OP's brother stayed in the car while OP and Chris walked into the gas station. OP noticed two guys in their mid-20s arguing with the cashier when he walked in, but he ignored the yelling because the whole situation made him uneasy. He walked to the back of the store where the restrooms were. The yelling got even louder, so OP turned around to see one of the men with a blue North Face jacket holding a pistol in the air as he yelled, "Enough!" and then brought the gun down to shoot the cashier. He then started shooting around the store, shattering the glass doors to the refrigerated drinks, and OP was scared and hid behind the closest display, beginning to hyperventilate. A manager came out of the back office right by OP, and he had a pistol with him, so he tried to shoot the assailant down, but he wasn't quick enough. OP crawled over to him and tried to help him, since he had learned first aid as a Boy Scout. OP says that he realized the manager wouldn't live without immediate medical attention. During this time, the man with the jacket started shooting again. He shot the lights near the hot dog display where OP last saw Chris standing, and then OP describes that everything just slowed down and became incredibly vivid and clear. Now, OP informs us that he has fired a gun before and that his father taught him how to do it when he was younger. With this in mind, OP took the manager's pistol and aimed at the second man who was accompanying the man with the jacket and then shot him. OP describes how he was feeling in the moment. "I was really caught off guard by the recoil of the gun because I was really strong." After that, the man in the jacket just turned around to look at him. They made eye contact, and he seemed shocked. And then he just shook his head and tried to raise his pistol again, but OP shot him twice. The man in the jacket's accomplice tried to reach for the gun, and OP yelled at him to stop, but he wouldn't listen, so OP ended up shooting him twice. OP then recalls how the police came and asked him to sit down on the curbside while the paramedics got to the manager. He describes remembering how the clarity and vividness he had while he was holding the gun was fading as he began explaining what happened to the police. OP remembers that the paramedics asked him if he was okay because his legs were covered in blood, and he also remembers his brother wrapping his arm around him while he was asked a million questions. He adds that later on, he remembers going to some type of insurance case for the manager where he informed the police and lawyers of what happened, and he remembers a man coming up to him and telling him that he saved the manager's life. OP confesses that he can still see the face of the man in the jacket, looking shocked and confused when he had the pistol aimed at him. He remembers the look he had when he fell with 2 gunshot wounds. OP remembers everything about that night. The only thing he doesn't remember is ever being asked how he felt about having killed 2 people. The only thing that was worse than nobody asking him was how he felt numb, and that absolutely horrified him. Keep in mind that OP was around 17 years old when this happened, and it was a very traumatizing event for him. Since there were no further mentions of Chris in the confession, I did check the comments on OP's profile. Thankfully, Chris was unharmed, just very shaken up. I am 18 years old and have no chance in the future. This was posted by a Reddit user who goes by the name My Life Is Done 9 years ago. The title of his post is 18 years old and no chance of future. The police lied to me. I confessed to murder. I'm probably going to die in prison for something I didn't do. OP begins his story with a TLDR, saying that his life could have been perfect, but he ended up confessing to murder and getting bailed out. He says he can't afford a lawyer and he's probably going to rot in prison. He didn't kill anyone, but he probably deserves it anyway. Providing us with some background, his parents came to the United States in 1998 with nothing except the clothes they wore and him as a 1-year-old baby. His parents worked hard their entire lives and eventually managed to secure their jobs, and they bought a house in a nice neighborhood. The neighborhood had a low crime rate, good schools, and friendly people. OP says that he has been offered a string of opportunities, yet rejected them all. His parents also spent all their money to make sure that his brother and sister, together, would be able to go to college and get good jobs to secure their future. Their parents provided support and never asked anything in return. OP says that a kid couldn't have asked for better parents, yet he still found a way to mess everything up. He says he has always been a slacker who never thought about what he'd do in the future. He could have easily passed at the top of his class with a 4.0 GPA, and he knows this because he aced every test he was given. In terms of test scores, he was higher than anyone else. He had all the free time in the world to study, but instead he chose to use that time to play video games instead and ended up with a 2.3 GPA. OP reminisces on how he could have done more, had everything, and gotten his life together early on, but he still blew it. The police rang the doorbell to his parents' house about 3 weeks ago, and they asked to speak to him. He said yes, and the police took him to what he thinks was an interrogation room. They had information that he was in an area where a murder had occurred. OP tried to tell the officer that he didn't do anything, but then the officer yelled at him, cursed at him, and called him a murderer. OP said it wasn't him, and then the police left him alone and locked in the room for an hour. When the police returned, they told him he could go home if he admitted to committing the murder, and they also said that his sentence would be less harsh. They said that they knew it was him, and denying it would be futile since they took DNA samples of everyone when they were born, and OP's DNA samples were a match to the ones they found. Now, thinking back on this, OP states that he just realized that they must have lied about having his DNA anywhere in their system because he was born in another country. He doubts they found any of his DNA on the body at all, because if they tested the DNA on the body against OP's DNA, they'd see that it's different and drop the case. OP says that at the time of the interrogation, he was foolish and thought the police couldn't lie because they're supposed to be good guys. Anyways, he says he was really scared and exhausted, so he said, "Okay, I did it." And then they recorded his confession. After this, the police took him to jail where he spent about a week. OP's parents sold their new car, used the college fund money and their savings to bail him out. He says he still has to go to court and he can't stay with his siblings because he's considered a potential threat to them. Due to this, he's staying with one of his father's friends. His father's friend's a nice guy, but he's rarely at home, and OP can't even go outside because everyone knows about the murder, and everyone hates him and knows he was arrested for it. He didn't want any of this. He didn't kill anybody, and he doesn't want to go to prison, but how can he defend himself from the confession? He would take it back if he could, but it paints him as a liar, and no one would believe. He just wants everything to be over. He then says some really dark stuff at the end, which is quite sad. Basically, he'd prefer receiving the death penalty rather than having to live life like this and end up rotting in prison. This was Reddit, so people were quick to jump in and start offering him advice. They told him to never speak to the police and to get a lawyer as soon as possible. Some even advised him to delete the post so that it can't be used against him. There were no updates after the confession, and the OP never made any comments. A man who had a sexual relationship with his mother. 14 years ago, on the Ask Me Anything community on Reddit, a man who had a relationship with his mother posted an AMA and dropped a really big confession regarding his relationship with his mother. His account today is deleted. Beginning his AMA post, he gives us some information about himself and then continues by answering some frequently asked questions. When he was in his teenage years, he had a relationship with his mother. He thinks that they would both characterize the experience as positive. Recently, his mother had been talking to a researcher who was studying examples of incest that was not traumatic, so he was open to answering any questions people might have. He states that he does not advocate for incest, and for whatever reason, it just worked between him and his mother. He says to not use his experience as a template. He's here to share his experience, not begin a whole debate with incest as the subject. He gives us the following information. He has an older sister, but she was unaware and not involved. His father knew about it, and he supported OP's mom's decision. The relationship ended around college. Anyway, both OP and the researcher who was working on a paper about non-traumatic incest were verified by the moderators. OP states that his father and sister did not have a similar relationship. Moving on to the questions that people had, many of them were very inappropriate and too explicit for me to talk about. So here's the watered-down version, which is just a recap. There weren't any dates because his relationship with his mother wasn't romantic. His relationship with his mother began after he had an accident and was injured. Being a teenager, he was very pent up and frustrated, and his mother just ended up offering to help him with it, so he accepted. OP also appears to avoid talking about his father. There aren't many comments about him. He answered a few questions, but honestly, his father just knew about what his mother and he were doing, and he did not intervene. The majority of the questions OP has asked look very fetish-oriented, and they're not relevant. To any regular person, what happened was clearly grooming. And just because OP was willing and he was not pressured into anything does not make it any less bad. He was young. I'm worried I'm going to kill someone one day. 11 years ago, a user named Potential Psycho made a post titled, "I'm worried I'm going to kill someone" on the Confession subreddit. The confession begins with the OP talking about how, from early childhood, he has always been a bit disturbed. He would often tell his parents to keep him away from other people because he wanted to hurt them. He was fascinated by violent crimes such as murder and SA. OP remembers reading in-depth articles about those things in the newspapers and magazines, all while he was as young as 8 years old. He would often get incredibly angry for no reason, to the point where he was shaking and would sometimes hurt himself. As he grew up, he got better at masking those urges. He has been diagnosed with a variety of disorders, mainly MDD and social anxiety, but he has never received a diagnosis for a psychotic disorder. He thinks about hurting people daily. He sees a girl in class and imagines hurting her, picturing the noises she'd make and whether or not she would scream and fight. He thinks about who would try to stop him, etc. He can spend hours daydreaming about these things. He doesn't like pain, but he wants it. He admits that basically what it comes to is just being afraid of doing those things to himself. He has never been a cruel person, never even killed a spider, but at the same time, he's stuck with these fantasies and making himself sick. The only comment on that post was telling OP to get help. The Potential Psycho account never posted again. I can't explain what was going on inside of me while a murder was happening. Posted on Reddit by a deleted user 7 years ago, OP begins the confession by informing us that it was a cold night, and they were eating at a fast food place together with their family. It was a long day, and they were enjoying some food after running errands. OP informs us that their family are Filipinos and they aren't from the US. Once they were finished eating, they called for a driver and paid him 100 pesos to take them directly to their home. The driver agreed, so they drove home. Their brother was only 2 years old at the time, and he fell asleep while he was hugging their mother. OP and their mother were talking about random things, just having a regular conversation. OP can remember the details of the conversation very well, including how it was mentioned that their face resembles their father's face. Everything was peaceful until suddenly they were caught in the middle of 2 motorcycles. The 3 vehicles were running, and suddenly the guy on the left took out a gun and shot the driver of the second motorcycle 7 times. OP describes remembering each sound and its distinctive bang. The driver slowed down and stopped at the side of the road while trying to comprehend what had just happened. Their mother was crying hard while trying not to make a sound since it could cause them to get noticed. She was hugging OP's baby brother and tried to shield them with her body while he was still asleep. They all cried without making a sound, while OP described just sitting there, body all frozen. OP knew what happened, and they weren't lost, but they were just not moving at all. They were 14 at the time, and they didn't shed a single tear nor actually feel cold. OP describes feeling like they weren't scared. Their heart didn't skip a beat, and they were more intrigued than frightened by the experience. They didn't flinch at the sound of the gunshots, nor at the sight. Everyone was laying low for what felt like forever, until 2 younger college girls screamed at what they saw. The driver who was shot was lying further down in front of OP and their family. The shooter then looked at the 2 women who screamed, and he shot them. OP's mother and their driver closed their eyes, but OP kept their eyes on the sight, staring right on as if watching a movie. The shooter looked in their direction, and OP squinted, as if to close their eyes, but not entirely. They thought that they were for sure going to die, or that their brother was going to wake up. It felt weird not knowing how to feel. They knew that they felt pain and fear, but for some reason, they also felt normal, like this was nothing out of the ordinary. There were no gunshots after that. OP saw the shooter get on his motorcycle and leave. Their mother was still quietly crying, and so was their driver. Their brother was still asleep during this time, and OP told everyone that it was safe now. Their driver took them back home, and they went into their house, where they were greeted by their grandmother. OP's mom burst out crying while they went upstairs and decided to go to bed. Slowly, OP felt like their limbs became numb, and their whole spine went cold. They fell to the floor and had to crawl their way to bed. They felt like they had a fever, and they immediately went to sleep without changing their clothes or taking their shoes off. OP woke up in the morning, feeling bad. They sat on their bed and stared at their wall for an hour until they finally cried about what had happened. They didn't make a sound. They just cried silently and let their tears flow for a good 30 minutes before they went on about their day normally. They still remember what happened, and they don't know what went on inside of them. They don't know what to do or what they should be feeling. OP was 14 at the time. The comments on OP's confession were people assuring OP that they had a traumatic experience and were probably too in shock to know what to do or how to react. Everyone reacts to something traumatic like that differently. and people were kind and apologetic towards OP. Confessions of a Predator. This was posted on the confession community 11 years ago by a user going by the name of PedoPen. Or maybe it's Pedo Open? Either way, fuck this guy. OP begins his confession by stating that he is a predator who is exclusively attracted to boys, but he knows all other predators inside and out. He will tell us about predators who are attracted to girls and those who are attracted to both girls and boys. He states that, obviously, he will not tell us about predators like himself. He believes that most men are attracted to young girls under 14, and they will not admit it, but they are. He blatantly states that if you ever run across a man who wants to be around your daughters, he is probably a predator. For example, if you dated a guy who was very open to the idea of being a part of your daughter's life, that should be a red flag. He then says that, unfortunately, most women are too stupid and desperate to differentiate between a man who wants to be with them and a man who just wants to be with their daughter. Usually, a predator would be the knight in shining armor, which women fall for all the time, and women usually throw a fit over that because they want to believe they are good enough when they are not. Furthermore, OP tells everyone to look at their teenage son's friends if they have a young daughter. He says that everyone would be surprised by how many of them are friends with their sons just to be near their daughters. Leave a pair of her underwear in the bathroom, and it will probably go missing after their son's friends leave. Finally, there are both predators who like both girls and boys. OP calls them the most despicable predators. He says that they have no self-control. He says you find these douchebags trolling on Omegle. A good example of those is To Catch a Predator. They are usually the ones who give off creepy vibes. Also, there are long-running inside jokes inside of the predator community. Those jokes are about how the mothers of fat and ugly children are usually the ones who are the most paranoid about their children being harmed. But in reality, no pedo would ever want to touch them. OP then tells everyone they can feel free to ask any questions about being a predator or send him a PM. Now, he never answered anything in the comments. Something that a bunch of people pointed out was how OP was basically gloating, reveling. He was just straight up unapologetic and even seemed proud to say all of these things in his confession. I stalked a girl online for months, and then 13 years ago, a user going by the username Foxina Boxrocks posted his confession onto the confession subreddit. He begins his confession by stating that he took things one step too far. OP originally found a girl on Tumblr by chance. It was random, and he was pretty much just clicking through different posts and source links until he stumbled upon a picture of her. She was very beautiful, without a doubt one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen. He browsed through her Tumblr, and he found all of her social media profiles through her posts. All her socials were public: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. She definitely wasn't shy about what she posted. OP says she was breathtaking. One day he was browsing her Instagram profile through a third-party site when he noticed that all her pictures were geotagged. 1, 2, 3, and more geotags that mapped out her entire life. He couldn't believe that most of her tags were less than an hour away from him. She didn't live across the world or anything. She was within driving distance, and that's when it started. He doesn't know what got into him, but he started digging deeper since he felt like he had to. Over the next few months, he put together all the pieces from her different social media profiles. He figured out where she lived, where she worked, what she studied, and where she went to school. He knew what campus she was staying on and what building. He even started to figure out her schedule and who her closest friends were, as well as what their names are and where they lived. Because she geotagged photos taken at their houses. OP figured out where her sister lived, where her parents lived, where her boyfriend lived. She took so many photos inside of the house, he could almost draw up the blueprints of it. He knew where she hung out and all the places she frequented. He even knew what car she drove and where she filled up for gas. To pinpoint some of her locations, he went as far as using Google Maps satellite together with Street View to identify trees and other objects that were visible in the backgrounds of her photos. He would search for things he recognizes, like the outside of the windows in some of the photos she posted. He couldn't stop, and this was all exhilarating for some reason. He was not supposed to know this, and he's certain nobody else does. With all the little fragments that she scattered across her social media, he pieced together a puzzle that detailed her entire life. It felt amazing, and he doesn't know why. But he didn't really do anything. It just felt like a game to him. One day on his way home, he drove around to run a few errands. He pulled up to a red light, and it suddenly dawned on him that this is the place, and he's in her neighborhood. He recognized everything around him, even though he'd never driven around here before. He recognized the sign on the road, the stores, and the trees. He was here, and it wasn't just a game anymore. When the light turned green, he decided to drive around the neighborhood until he got to her street. There it was. He was driving down, and right ahead was her house, together with her car and her. Everything he had pieced together was real, not just a bunch of ones and zeros anymore. He drove by, just looking at her house. He knew her house. He knew the curtains on the window. They were the ones she posted a picture of months ago. And then it suddenly dawned on him. What the heck was he doing? He hit the gas and drove home. He had to leave, and he realized that this was not a game, it was somebody's life. OP states that he's not really sure why he's posting this. It's been over a month since he drove past her house, and he hasn't even thought about continuing the stalking since then. He just needed to tell his story for some reason. It was a strange feeling, even if it doesn't sound that interesting to others. OP says that everyone can at least take this as a warning to protect their identity online. He informs us that individually, she wasn't posting much information. He guesses she wasn't expecting someone to try and piece everything together though. To clarify things, this was the first time OP ever did anything like this, and he says it will be the last. OP says that he honestly just enjoyed it for the challenge at first. He didn't know the girl, and she didn't know him. It became somewhat of a hobby, just piecing things together like they're all little clues to reveal a bigger picture. Basically, it all felt like he spent months working on a digital puzzle, realized it was creepy, and he snapped out of it. I had telephone sex with a man who confessed to serious crimes. On the Confession subreddit 8 years ago, a Redditor posted her confession and tagged it with remorse. The title of her confession is that she's had phone sex with a man who confessed to serious crimes. Her confession begins with her stating that she initially stumbled on his blog. It contained misogynistic adult content and extreme fetishes, which ranged from encouraging violence against women to encouraging assault. There were some snuff-related kinks that he had on there too. The more content she read on his blog, the more messed up she realized he was. What really caught her attention was that he mentioned he was a professor. He had his Kik username posted, and she couldn't resist wanting to prod him. At this point in her confession, she says that she doesn't condone any of the things she mentioned earlier, nor any of the things she will talk about after. She says she put on a persona for him because she was genuinely interested in understanding how a person like him thinks. OP contacted him, and she pretended to be one of his female supporters. She wanted to catch his attention, and she made a fake background story for herself. Soon enough, he replied. He wasn't very chatty in the beginning, but after a few compromising pictures, the conversations with him started getting more interesting. She started asking him questions about what he's into, and slowly got more personal until she finally got to ask the questions she was really interested in. She informs everyone that before she mentions the information she's about to share, she has to give us a warning that it may be very upsetting. She's also left with more questions than before, and she plans to continue digging for some more. Anyway, she admits to us that he mentioned he wouldn't mind doing stuff with animals and young people if an opportunity presented itself. OP asked him what the youngest he would go for is, and I don't think you want to know what he said. From there on, their conversation shifted to gore and stuff. She pretended to be into it and asked him more personal questions. He then demanded that she give him her number because he doesn't want to answer through text. She made the decision on impulse, and she gave him her number. He called her, and they started talking about stuff. Soon enough, he admitted to her that he had murdered a her. He also essayed several women. Some were outright violent, and others were assaults where he drugged his victims, or they were too drunk. He was surprised that OP didn't seem surprised he had murdered someone. He opened up even more because of that. OP had been feeding his ego because she figured he's a complete psychopath, narcissist, or antisocial person, and truth be told, she felt excited while talking to him. It wasn't because of what he did or because she liked him. It was because of the fact that he was opening up to her and telling her all of his dirty secrets. He told her that he was on the deep web and that he watches CP and snuff there, along with other things. Through her conversations, he would order OP to call herself certain things or tell him how she was assaulted, basically to humiliate her and the persona she had created. He was trying to prod her to recount things about her assault and the story she made up. OP could tell that he was enjoying himself. He was talking about wanting to make snuff again, this time with a person who is not old. And OP played along, pretending to be into the same stuff. She ends her confession by saying that here she is today, and whether she should keep talking to him to piece together who he is. OP has been taking notes of everything he told her, and she has been able to narrow down the location of his residence. Another part of her wanted to instantly tell the cops about him, but she doesn't know if she has enough evidence to get him caught. And then there's also the risk of him coming after her. She says that he lives far enough for her to not have to worry too much about that, though. In the update of OP's post, she says that she made an anonymous report. Going through OP's comments, we can find one where she says that as messed up as the things she likes are, she doesn't act out on them as he does. Some more of the things he told her are like how he pushed one of his students into attempting to end it, and how he ruined the life of his friend by hooking her onto hard drugs and then using her in every way possible. He talked about it as if it's the most normal thing in the world, and he's just an honest person while others suppress their desires. He's also a neuroscience professor with a family on top of that. OP says that now that she had more context on what he plans and where he wanted to do this, she reported him. She says that in comparison to other psychotic killers, he was quite disappointing. She thought he'd be more vile, but he wasn't. OP admits to getting off to mess up things in the comments. Some users call her out for it, as well as for engaging with a criminal like the one she was talking to. Her response to this was basically trying to brush it off as mere curiosity, but from an objective perspective, no one was buying it, and it was clear that she had some mental issues herself. No updates were made. All we know is that she anonymously made a report, and then she blocked his number. I'm a sick and twisted father. I became aroused by my daughter. This confession was posted 11 years ago by a user named TRN341P2. It comes from a father who admitted to having deeply inappropriate feelings toward his daughter. His confession is tagged with remorse. He begins by saying that he knows he's sick, he knows he's mental, and he knows he's a deranged and disgusting man who does not deserve a family. It's just like an unwelcome disease in his head, which he can't control. He is 42, and he describes himself as married to the most amazing woman in the world. He says he's lucky to have her, and that if she found out what was going on inside his head, she would leave him in an instant. He gives us the story of what happened by explaining some of the layout of his house first. His house has a few bathrooms. One is adjacent to the parents' bedroom, and the other one is connected to his daughter's bedroom. The only way one can access it is through her bedroom. Usually his wife and he would use the bathroom right next to their bedroom, and their daughter would use her own bathroom. For some period of time, the shower in their bathroom was broken and unusable, though. During this period of time, his wife and he were using their daughter's bathroom to shower whenever they needed to. It was no big deal. It just meant that they had to wait for whoever finished showering first. He returned back home on one particular day. It was a Friday, and it was really hot all afternoon. He had a long day at work with a lot of trouble and stress, so he went out for a 2-hour jog before coming back home. He says he got back home in the afternoon really tired as he was drenched in sweat. His body was tense, yearning for release and relaxation. His daughter was upstairs in her bathroom having a shower. He thought he'd wait for her to finish. He didn't know if she knew whether he was home or not, and she probably hadn't heard. His wife was at home, and she knew he was back. After a while, he walked past the corridor, and he didn't hear any water running, so he figured his daughter would have finished her shower. He says he wouldn't just barge in. The bathroom had a lock on the door just in case, and he would see if she was in her bedroom. And if not, he'd call out to her to hear whether or not she was in the shower before he went into her bedroom. He opened the door to her bedroom, and sure enough, she was there. She was lying half asleep on her bed. He can't even describe what went on through his head as the 42-year-old father. She was just lying there immaculately, her eyes closed. She was breathing, peacefully, looking like an angel. He stood there, staring at her for at least 10 minutes. It was like his mind couldn't see that she was his daughter. Every perverse thought entered it. He felt like a garbled mess, as if his brain had fallen out of his body. Eventually, he got a hold of himself and went into the bathroom, where he relieved himself. When he came out of the shower, she was still there. She was now awake and had covered herself with her sheets. She asked him when he had come home, and he told her it was a few minutes ago. He was struggling to talk to his own daughter. She must have noticed something unusual in his expression because she asked him what was wrong. He told her he had a bad day at work, and then she told him some things he used to say to her back when she was younger and had a bad day at school. He says he feels sick. He's a disgusting human, and he doesn't even know what to call himself for having these thoughts. He knows they're wrong, and he really wishes he didn't have them. He knows that he probably needs help if he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't even know if he can turn towards anyone and speak to them about this. If anyone ever found out, especially his wife, his life would be over. He doesn't deserve to be a father. He doesn't deserve to be a husband. There were no updates or any noteworthy comments under the confession. I essayed a woman on a night out. and now feel terrible several years later. This next Reddit confession was shared a year ago by the user Who Likes Baseball 59 on the Confession subreddit. His confession begins with him saying that it is something that has heavily been weighing on his mind for a couple of weeks. He simply forgot about it, but he's now coming to terms with how gross and disgusting his actions were that night. For reference, he informs us that he was 25 at the time. He also apologizes if he seems to ramble in the story. He's just trying to get his thoughts out. A few years ago, some friends of his invited him to go out and drink with them. While he doesn't enjoy the nightlife or drink heavily, he still decided to go and be more open to something new and just get out of the house. At first, he wasn't really enjoying himself, but as the night progressed and the drinks kept flowing, he became more social. At some point, he bumped into a mutual friend. Let's call her Sam. She was a couple of years older, and they've always had pleasant interactions in the past. He never thought about her since she lived in the neighboring town, but they were really vibing together, and they had some flirting going on. They were having fun, and everything was going great. Eventually, everyone started to head home, and Sam invited him to her place for the night, and he happily agreed. Once at her house, Sam turned on some music, and they continued their conversations over glasses of wine. He says that he wasn't expecting anything at this point. He was just really enjoying her company, and they connected over the same music artist, which they both liked. OP says that he didn't have much experience with girls, and he was still a virgin. Anyway, he decided to take things slow and let her make the moves because he was thoroughly drunk at this time. His memory of that night is hazy, but there's no doubt about how he wanted the night to end. After half an hour or so, Sam suggested they watch a movie, and they both moved to the couch. They hadn't kissed or done much touching throughout the whole night. After about 10 minutes, he decided to move closer and put his arm around her. She leaned into him, and he decided to go in for a kiss because he thought that surely it was a sign she liked him. Instead, she pulled back, and she said that she thinks he's cute, but she's not into him like that. He was a little confused and hurt by that, but anyway, it's okay, and they go back to watching the movie. She was just being nice, and they were connecting as friends. That should have been great. No harm, no foul. Except not. His mind was spinning from the alcohol, and he couldn't tell apart above from down. He admits to escalating inappropriate physical contact despite her clear discomfort. She freezes at first, then firmly says no, stopping him before it goes any further. He moves away from her on the couch, and after some awkward silence, he profusely apologizes and blames the alcohol. She says it's okay when it's obviously not, and she goes to bed while he stays on the couch and crashes there. As one can imagine, the next morning was extremely awkward. He broke the silence again by apologizing for his actions, blaming the alcohol. While the alcohol impacted his decision-making, it is no excuse for what he did. She again said it was okay and that she wouldn't tell any of their friend groups about what happened. He left, and that was that. They haven't seen or spoken to each other since. He quickly forgot about that night and moved on with his life, thinking he's an honorable and good human being, trying to live his life accordingly. He's not. Deep down, everyone has some evil lurking, and he witnessed his. He reads stories about SA on Reddit all the time, and it's so easy to judge those people from behind a computer screen and think, I would never do that, or I would do X and Y differently. These past few weeks, he's been doing some soul searching, and he needed to get this all out. He doesn't drink anymore. He feels like crap even if it happened years ago. As far as he knows, Sam hasn't told anyone about that night. He's debating if he should reach out to her and really explain how fucked up it was and really apologize, but maybe this would hurt her more. He doesn't know. He guesses that's it for now. OP made an edit to his post since there were differing terms for what SA is. He said he doesn't need people telling him that he did nothing wrong, and he linked a definition to what the act of consent is. OP also makes a second edit to thank everyone who talked to him. He says he wasn't looking for any justification for what he did. He was a horrible person, and he knows it, and he carries that inside of him. He will have to deal with that for the rest of his life. Anyway, in summary of OP's second edit, the general consensus is that he should absolutely not contact Sam ever again. OP ends his post by stating that this was an eye-opening experience, and he hopes no one makes the same mistakes he did. He warns people about doing bad things, and he also tells them to be careful when they're under the influence and impulsive. I have necrophilic tendencies, and I know they're seen as wrong. 9 years ago, on the Confession subreddit, a user going by the name of Lendope confessed that he can only be aroused by necrophilia porn, fantasies, or similar scenarios with it in movies. He gives Gudo-chan as an example. He says that he knows he'll never be able to get any satisfaction through regular intercourse with an awake partner, and he says regular intercourse is actually revolting to him in a way. In all of society and the media, this is seen as disgusting and terrifying. Inside, it makes him feel like no one would ever understand him. He's doomed to a lifetime of repressed desires, and in society's eyes, he deserves as much. He also tagged his confession with remorse. I massacred a family of mice I bought as pets to help me during my depression. OP's account is deleted, but they posted this on the confession subreddit 6 years ago. OP begins their admission by informing us that in 2011, they bought a very lovely mouse. Their mouse got old quickly, so they decided to buy him company for his last days. After the old one died, the new one was left alone, so they bought him 2 females by accident. Weeks passed, and the female mice's bellies grew large. Days later, they both gave birth to huge litters. One of the females ate hers, but the other one kept all her babies. Obviously, this was much more than OP ever intended. They allowed the babies to grow up for a few more weeks, but unfortunately, the mouse that ate her litter gave birth again, and this time, she kept them all. At this point, it was the male mouse, 2 mature females, and about a dozen pinkies and adolescents. OP found a guy on Facebook who was looking for mice to feed to his snake, so they offered up the 2 females and the largest baby to him. They put their mice in the car and made their way to where the guy lived. They talked to him in his house for about 15 minutes, but unfortunately, they forgot that the mice were in the car. They came back to the car, and the mice were all soaking from dehydration and heat. One died, and the others were unconscious. OP says that the guy still took them to feed his snake. Back home, they were left with the male mouse and a dozen babies. Weeks passed, and the female babies grew older, ready to mate. One female mouse in particular caught OP's attention. They called the mouse Edna. Edna was getting constantly knocked up by the male mouse, getting pregnant and eating her babies. This happened twice. Edna had enough of it and escaped the cage. She disappeared for weeks, but every few days, OP would see her sneak into the cage to eat and drink, and she'd get knocked up again while she was in there. Then she'd escape again. OP got really frustrated one night and grabbed her by the tail, walked outside, and threw her as far as they could. However, she climbed up the broadband cord leading to their room. OP was shocked because they didn't know mice could find their way back home like a dog can. They flung her over the fence and across the street about half a dozen times, but she kept coming back in various ways. OP let her be because they didn't want to kill her with their hands. The male mouse was really old by now and dying. There were about 6 surviving children, none of whom reproduced. The male mouse died soon after, and they gave away the rest of the mice to the snake guy again. They thought their mouse days were over. Keep in mind, the reason why all this even happened was because they were in a deep depression. Their room was a mess. It looked like a dump. They slept most of the days away and smoked the other half, but eventually they started coming out of the depression and began cleaning up their surroundings. One night, out of the corner of their eye, they saw a little white thing running across the room. They thought it was their mind playing tricks on them, so they ignored it. This happened several times until they woke up and were staring at a little baby mouse in the face. It was skinny and malnourished, but it ran away as soon as they got up. Over the next few days, they saw more of them scavenging for crumbs and whatever they could find to eat. OP made up their mind that they couldn't stay living this way, in a filthy room with mice running around. They woke up early on a weekday, opened every window, and decided to clean up everything. During their heavy cleaning session, OP saw several of the starved mice running around. They had a fishnet which they trapped the mice with. They caught them with clothes and shoe boxes, they threw them in the yard, and they let the dog play with them roughly until they died. The final mouse they caught, they handled too hard, and it died in their hands. They still remember how awful they felt, but they say it was necessary. OP felt good about themselves. Their room was finally mouse-free. However, at the end of their cleaning, they still had to empty their closet. What they found there was truly horrifying. Edna had made a nest deep in the closet and scattered all across the nest were the corpses of pinkies, dead and half dead. One seemed healthier than the rest. They stopped to think if they should keep it and nurse it, but they didn't want a repeat of the last time, so they vacuumed it and thought, out of sight, out of mind. What they saw next added to the horror. Edna was still alive, and she was still dirty and malnourished. She was old as well, and she looked days away from death. OP apologized for making her life a living hell with tears in their eyes, and then OP tossed her to the dogs. That was the last they ever saw of the mice. OP says that this is a completely true story with zero embellishments. They are not proud of how they handled the situation and have many regrets. They were younger and not in the right state of mind. OP just wanted to get this story out there and have this off of their chest. It's probably the only thing they are truly ashamed of doing willingly. I was drugged and assaulted by a man a couple of nights ago, and I don't care. OP is a 27-year-old man, and his username won't be mentioned. His confession begins with him informing us that he was at a party a couple of nights ago. He got there at 7 p.m. and had 2 beers during his stay. He said he had some addiction problems in the past, and he's pretty close to being clean now, hence why he had only 2 beers. It was around 1 a.m., and he was sitting in the living room and watching Nathan For You with a guy he had met earlier that night. He was a pretty cool dude, and he liked Nathan For You too, so they hit it off pretty quick. So here they are, watching TV, and all of a sudden, he started to come on to him. He asked him if he'd ever considered doing it with a man, to which OP responded with a simple, "Sorry man, but I'm into women." OP also told him that he's completely fine with his sexual orientation and assured him that it didn't affect his ability to have a friendship with him. The guy backed off with his flirting, and they continued to watch TV. After 20 minutes or so, he asked OP if he wanted another drink. Since OP was completely sober at this point, he agreed and said sure. He was brought a vodka tonic, and after he took a couple of sips, he noticed that he was getting drunker than usual, and he was feeling really wobbly. That was the last thing OP remembers. When OP woke up the next morning, he was in the guest room with a crushing headache. He also noticed that his jeans were pulled down, and he was feeling very sore behind. OP felt like he had caught a cold for some reason. His throat was really sore, and every time he coughed to try and clear the phlegm, it caused more pain to shoot throughout his body. OP realized that he had been assaulted. He pulled up his pants and left the house. He got into his car and drove back to his apartment. He didn't really feel anything. He wasn't sad or angry. He just didn't feel anything at all. At first, he thought it was just the shock, but it's been 3 days now, and he still doesn't really care, almost as if it didn't affect him at all. He went to the doctor yesterday to get looked at and to get an STD screening. He suffered an injury, and he's still waiting on the STD results. An edit to OP's post informs everyone that he visited the police. He also says that the STD test was inconclusive, and he'd have to return another time. Through his comments, OP says that though he reported the assault to the police, he didn't know his last name, and the police said they would look into it, which means they won't do anything until someone else reports it. Basically, there isn't much they can do unless someone else reports a man with the same name and description. Some more information about the situation is that OP didn't know anyone at the party he attended. He went there with a Tinder date that didn't really work out, and she left him at around 9 p.m. because she had work in the morning. He literally knows no one at that party, so he can't even ask anyone about his assailant. My dog ate my brother, and I let it happen. This was posted 6 years ago on the Confession subreddit by the user Inkblot. When OP was 8 years old, he dug holes all over the backyard for literally no use. He remembers his mother being pregnant, but he never saw his brother being brought back home. He never met him either. One day, as he was digging, he found a small wooden box. He opened it, expecting some treasure his imagination had led him to believe existed, but inside of the box was what OP describes as a small humanoid beef jerky of a fetus. Thinking back on it, OP now knows that it was his brother. As he put the box aside and looked around the hole, he found a note that said, "I will always love you, my sweet child." And when OP turned around, he saw his dog eating the thing inside of the box. OP never told his mother about it, and he feels extremely guilty. OP then adds an edit to clear some things up since people in the comments appeared confused. OP informs everyone that he is 18 now, and it had all happened 10 years ago. He lived in a very shady town really close to the Mexican border, so the health system there was pretty messed up. All he knows is that the loss took a really hard toll on his mother. He says that he knows his mother sometimes blames OP for his little brother's death. OP was an overdeveloped baby, and he guesses that he pretty much messed up her womb since he was born at nearly 11 months old. He was also born the natural way. OP sometimes sees how his mother looks at other families' babies, and he can't help but feel guilty seeing the sorrow in her eyes. He feels bad, and he also feels responsible for the fact that, well, his dog had basically eaten his little brother. I'm aroused by Vor, and it's draining my mental health. This was posted last year by a throwaway account on the Confession subreddit. OP says he's using this throwaway because there is no way in hell he wants to be linked to his confession. He thinks his earliest memory was in kindergarten, when he imagined what it would be like to get eaten by his teacher, and he was also feeling really weird because of it. After that, it only got more solidified by things like the beginning scene of Men in Black 2 or various scenes in different cartoons. And now here he was as a young adult, getting excited by the idea of being swallowed by women, quite literally for lunch. The thing that's starting to get to him is that some of the things that get him going are psychopathic level. People being treated like their lives don't matter is a common trope, and it makes his whole heart burn with anger and disgust. Yet, lo and behold, it also turns him on. It's also getting to him, and he feels like he's keeping a secret from his girlfriend. They have been dating for 2 years, and while she knows that OP finds stomachs attractive, she has no idea he has a fetish. OP likes bigger women in general, and that's not related to his thing for vor. He feels like he's deceiving her for letting her think that he's a normal person, and a part of him wants to tell her about this and hope that they can move past this. At the same time, how could she possibly understand him, let alone accept it? He's worn out by this, and he feels like a freak. I used to frequently beat my younger brother who was half my age. This was shared 2 years ago by a now deleted user. OP confesses that he used to beat his younger brother. He was in his early teens, and his brother was around half of his age. He remembers one instance specifically, when it was just his younger brother and him at home. He had paused his game on the family computer and left to use the restroom. When he returned, his brother was curiously messing around with the computer and somehow let his in-game character die. This made OP really mad, and he beat the shit out of his brother. He still remembers seeing the fear in his brother's eyes. OP states that, although infrequent, this kind of beatdown occurred until his brother was in his early teens. When he was in his mid-20s, he told his mother about this. He told her how he used to hit his brother and how he felt remorse about it. Hit was a big understatement, but he didn't have the courage to tell her he used to outright abuse him. His mother just said, "Really? I think he loves you very much. You're the only one he listens to." But OP knew that his brother would listen to him out of fear only. After leaving home at 18, he became much softer towards his younger brother. He bought him birthday and seasonal gifts and tried to be as supportive as a brother could be, but he has never apologized to him. He is aware that this is just an excuse, but he was abused by his father and bullied at school for as long as he can remember. It was frequent and harsh, but the domestic abuse was mostly only towards him. OP says that he's now grateful that it was only towards him. He just wishes he didn't do the same to his brother. Although he is now physically bigger and stronger than his father, he still fears him and wouldn't dare to question him. He can't imagine ever getting over this fear, and he's afraid that it may be the same case with his brother towards himself. He had a dream today where his little brother and he were both kids again, happily playing together as kids would. When he woke up, he instinctively knew the dream was a world where he was never abusive towards his brother, and his brother genuinely felt safe with him. He remembers what he had done to him and all the innocence he may have robbed him of. He cried a little and decided he needed to confess to random people online. Currently, OP is in his late 20s, and his brother is now a college student. His brother is doing well from what he can tell. He is now a tall, muscular, smart, and very good-looking gentleman. OP says he is very proud of him. A few months ago, his brother called him and told him how his college life is going, and he talked about his future dreams. OP was elated. He was just happy his brother was telling him about himself, especially since this was the first and only time since he left home over a decade ago. At the end of his confession, OP apologizes to his brother, who will never see his post. He says that there is no need for his brother to forgive him for what he has done, but he hopes his brother can forgive him for not having the courage to apologize. He loves him. OP then made an edit to add some more information. First of all, he thanks all the people who left comments from a place of love and experience. To people who don't understand why it can be so hard to apologize, OP says to allow him to give some background. OP and his brother were raised in an old-school household where words meant nothing. They were taught to let their actions speak for themselves. As abusive as his father was, he was a man of few words, and he led by example instead. OP says he has never once seen his father shed a tear or complain, and his father treated his mother with respect. His mother would always respect his father's decisions and never talked back. She stayed home, cooked dinner, and kept the house clean. The only time he ever saw his mother stand up against his father was when he was getting a beating, and he wouldn't stop. OP's mother screamed if he didn't stop, she would divorce him. Since then, he never got severe beatings on his mother's watch. He was always a happy boy when his father wasn't home, but he never felt that he was being abused abused because this was his norm. He never felt like he wanted to run away because that was all he knew. His depression only set in when he acknowledged the abuse. It filled him with pain, and he succumbed. So his reasoning was, he was afraid that apologizing to his brother for abusing him would lead to acknowledgement. His brother might walk the same path of depression as he did. Saying sorry carried a little weight in their household. When he visited his Hispanic friend's house, they all hugged and kissed each other, even though they last saw each other that same morning. That was their household. If he brought that into his household, sure, it wouldn't hurt, but it would be awkward as hell. So he tried to let his actions speak instead of his words. He wouldn't want his father apologizing to him for what he did to him. Just imagining it makes him feel uncomfortable, and he also understands where his father comes from. That was how he was raised, and that was the only way he knew how to raise a son. Then, his father learned from his mother that he was depressed. He only knows this because his mother told him later. He started reading books on depression and tried to understand what he was going through. This was enough for him. He saw his father last Christmas for the first time in several years. His father is in his mid-60s now, but looked much older than he remembered, much smaller and scrawnier. While he was waiting at the train station to pick him up, he didn't know at the time, but his father missed his train and was running about 40 minutes late. It was cold, but he patiently waited for him. After 40 minutes of looking at each and every face that could be his father, he saw him. His father was walking with his usual grumpy face, but the moment he saw OP, he smiled and waved, seeming genuinely happy to see him. At that moment, OP remembered how much he loved that man. Sure, most of the beatings were out of the blue. His father may have just had a shitty day at work, and it was unfair to him. But his father also raised him saying, life isn't fair. Now, why did one comment make him decide to apologize? The comment came from another younger brother who was abused by his brother, so it carried weight to OP. He thought of his brother as he read the comment. The commenter said he loved his brother, but wasn't brave enough to hold himself accountable, and he was assuming his younger brother was okay. He sat on the comment for a while, reading it over and over again. The commenter was right. He was assuming that his younger brother was okay. He also wouldn't want his brother to feel like he's not brave enough to ask for forgiveness, when OP himself was the one not brave enough to apologize. OP also addresses the people who decided to personally attack him, or commented just to punch down on somebody else. He says that oftentimes in life, things are not just this good or this bad, but in between. He is nobody to them, and he is confessing he abused his brother. It's a great opportunity to crap on someone, and he understands and deserves it. He'll take it, but before anyone goes anywhere else on the internet and says something, they need to understand there's another human on the receiving end. If someone wouldn't say something to OP's face, then they shouldn't say it online. If there is someone who would say it to his face, he respects it 100%. OP is not saying to kiss anyone's ass and say, poor baby, you did nothing wrong, but he's asking people to be understanding and respectful. If someone can't relate to him, just don't say anything. No one has to feel like they always need to say something. I used to abuse women and can't tell my girlfriend or friends. This was shared by a throwaway account 12 years ago. OP's confession starts with him saying that he's currently dating a beautiful woman who works as a social worker at a domestic violence shelter. Their relationship is stable and harmonious, and they get along very well. However, she is well aware of the fact that abusive partners often cannot be rehabilitated. It's a common thing for domestic abuse to be a cycle, where the man swears he has changed and the woman goes back, only to be abused again. His girlfriend has no tolerance for these sorts of behaviors and actively hates abuse and so-called reformed partners. OP adds a literal quote from her, where she said, "There is no such thing as a reformed abuser." Now, the problem. OP admits that he is a reformed abuser. He dated a series of girls starting from high school all the way through college. He can safely say he left significant emotional scars on all of them. He lied to them regularly and cheated many times. He also manipulated them into adult activities. He took everything out on them. He harassed their friends who tried to separate them. He constantly accused them of being unfaithful and mounted attacks on their male acquaintances for the alleged affairs. He kept contacting and manipulating them even after they broke up, generally ending in blocked numbers and Facebook profiles, which he would stalk using throwaway accounts or payphones. He says that he will never be sure of how much pain he caused, but he knows that he had a significant role in messing up the emotional development for each of those women. Oftentimes, girls with self-esteem issues will talk about someone in their life that caused them a huge amount of pain, and everyone in the conversation says something along the lines of, "If I'd had been there, I would have kicked his ass for you." Well, OP is the one who deserves that ass kicking in this scenario. After a particularly damning breakup from an ex of his, which included a ban on seeing him from her parents and friends, he went to see someone for help. After this and a year or so of self-reflection, reorganization, and medication, he changed his personality a good bit. OP was then introduced to his current girlfriend, who remains blissfully unaware of his past. She works at a shelter for domestic violence and has been abused herself, so she gives no quarter to excuses or claims of change. They've been together for over 2 years, with no hint of an abusive relapse from him. He has changed his social circle, and his friends also have no idea. He's not going to tell anyone about this, and it isn't who he is anymore. It could cost him his most valued relationships, but he's still ashamed. I lust to kill a predator. The next confession was shared 5 years ago by a deleted user. The confession starts with the OP begging others to understand that his confession is not a plan nor an intention to commit a murder, and it is merely a dark fantasy that he has. Ever since OP understood what a pedophile was, all he has ever wanted in life was the feeling of torturing or murdering one. He understands that any sane human hates pedophiles with every fiber of their being, but after numerous conversations with people, he feels as though his hatred for them far exceeds that of rational thinking. He won't disturb anyone with the details, but the things he fantasizes of doing to them are sickening, to say the least. He has been told by a friend who had been victimized as a child that his views were barbaric even compared to predators' actions. OP doesn't see why his views are so bad, considering what they would dare do to a child. He doesn't know if this is normal. From what he's been told, no, it is not normal, and far exceeds the sense of justice that he hopes to have. He doesn't know why he feels such hatred towards them without stating the obvious reasons. He has never been a victim. He's also a 19-year-old man. His suspicion for his feelings is the fact that he has an overwhelming fear and distrust of people. Also, he has 2 siblings who are both under 10 years old. Pair that with the rage he holds from being relentlessly bullied as a kid and adolescent. He worries that his so-called lust to take out a predator and his rage will take hold of him one day. He is certain that if he were to come across someone he knew to be a child predator, he would kill them. But he doesn't want to. He knows that if he ever does that, then he can't protect those he loves. OP makes an edit to clarify that he is specifically referring to predators who have offended. He has no bad intent regarding those who do not offend. The ones he is referring to in his post are child predators who have hurt children and done wrong. My dad was murdered in front of me, and I never told anyone. Posted by a user going by the name of Poilim 7 years ago. OP grew up in a bad neighborhood. Their dad was a minor drug dealer, their mom worked at a grocery store, and they had basically no money. Their mom died from cancer when they were 10 years old. It happened very suddenly, so it was just them and their dad from there on. Their father got more involved with selling drugs over time. When they were 13 years old, he had 2 men over, both of whom OP sort of knew as his associates. OP says that they sort of hustled him down and very suddenly and yelled at OP, telling them to go to their room. They went, but they could still see them through the crack in their door. The 2 guys killed their father. The men left and ran out as soon as their dad dropped to the ground. OP went over to him and looked at them with fear in his eyes while crying in pain. They called 911 right away, but he died before the ambulance could arrive. OP told the police it was a robbery and a home invasion. They lied because they were terrified the men would come back to get them if they told the police who it really was. Apparently, after their dad was killed, someone snitched on the so-called friends who killed him. They ended up in prison for an unrelated murder. Their cousin worked with their dad, and he was the one who told OP this. OP went to go live with their aunt in California across the country. They told her it was a home invasion. They also told their friends their dad was dead and offered no more of an explanation. Nobody there knows what actually happened. This was during 1999. They have never told anyone about witnessing their dad's death, nor the intense trauma it caused them for years. They went to 2 trauma specialists and therapy for a bit, but it didn't help them very much. They still think of that incident every single day of their life. It makes them quiver when they think about it. My parents abused my little brother his whole life, and now he's a predator. Sad Sister 11 posted the following confession 12 years ago. Her family adopted their little brother when he was 5 years old from an orphanage in Russia. Let's call him Zach. OP was 7 years old and remembers feeling pretty indifferent to the whole idea of adoption. OP's mom would ask her, "Are you excited for your new brother?" And she would say yes because that was what she thought she wanted to hear. But she was never really excited. When her adopted brother arrived, he couldn't speak any English, but OP thinks he learned the language pretty quickly. The details from their childhood and when they were young are pretty hazy. Things were mostly normal and good for a couple of months. It was an adjustment period for everyone. From the beginning, she could tell that everything was not normal with Zach. Their mom would try to hold him or hug him, and he would thrash around and scream as a reaction to the attempted affection. Zach always lied, which can be normal for some kids, but he literally lied about everything, and he never grew out of it. He stole and broke many of his toys, OP's toys, and their sister's toys. He threw heinous tantrums over everything. The tantrums were the worst. They were full of shrieking and banging against walls and doors. OP's parents started getting really frustrated after about a year into it. They bought dozens of books on how to handle a troubled child. They started going to a therapist with him too. They really tried to do all of the suggested procedures to combat the issue, but they began to give up. Their parents resorted to spankings, which quickly escalated to harsher physical abuse. Zach would say incredibly mean things to OP, their sister, and their mother. He'd tell them they were fat and ugly and monsters. He got into a lot of trouble at school, and he always had bad grades. One time, he ran into a teacher on purpose, and she fell and broke her hip. There were a lot of punishments in their house, always between their parents and Zach. Unlike their brother, OP had absolutely no reason to be afraid of their parents. OP would never do anything to hurt them. So OP tried to make her parents stop. Whenever things started getting heated, OP would just scream at the top of her lungs at their parents to stop. Her mom would absolutely not take it from her. She just threatened OP with punishment, which many times didn't stop them, and she ended up getting in trouble. Meanwhile, their dad would often stop when they yelled. The physical violence budded more emotional and verbal abuse. One thing their mom got from the psychiatrist was ignoring Zach when he was trying to get negative attention. This resulted in complete neglect and denial of basic needs, such as food and a bathroom. Zach would often have to hold it in for hours. Eventually, their parents started telling him terrible and mean things. She remembers tiptoeing to the kitchen door to listen to their dad telling Zach that he was going to go to jail for all the stuff he was doing and that he was never going to have a real life outside. Their dad told him he was stupid and worthless as well as a freak. He said they never should have adopted him. They could never have imagined their dad ever saying these things to anyone, especially his own child. Once, when she was in middle school, she told a friend about everything. And she told the school counselor, who interviewed her about it and made a report to Child Protective Services. Several reports have been made over the years by Zach's teachers, so this last one really piqued their interest. They had an agent come to OP's house to investigate and interview everyone separately. OP was pretty sure she was the only one who told the truth because they left without doing anything and wrote them off as a middle schooler trying to get attention. That's what their parents told her anyway. This happened 2 more times, and nothing came of it. During this time period, she almost failed all their classes and developed a stomach ulcer from all the stress. She tried talking to her brother about the situation multiple times, and she tried to talk about how they all loved him even if it didn't show. But he just shut her out. She felt so helpless. Things have gotten a little less hostile in the past years, but mean comments still slip out. OP has always been there to tell him to stop, but it has never worked. Their parents have never been justified in anything they've done to him, but Zach is truly a sociopath. He has some extreme issues. It started with him doing something wrong and trying to fake being sorry about it. Then he started laughing about the bad things he would do, like, for example, lying and stealing. Things started getting really weird when Zach started high school. Her bras and underwear began disappearing like crazy. She never imagined it was Zach until months later when she was looking in his closet for art supplies and she found all of her missing undergarments. OP was completely shocked, and it took her a couple of days before she told her parents. Her parents apologized to her and said they would bring it up in therapy with Zach. OP got a lock for her door and moved on. But it kept happening. He would steal her things from the laundry. Anytime she asked him about it, he would lie and say he didn't know how her things got in his closet. One day, he confessed and pretended to cry, although no tears were really coming out of his eyes. Unfortunately, things got worse. The only friend Zach had growing up was a boy who was a family friend in their neighborhood. OP calls him Charlie. Charlie was 3 years younger, but Zach and he were both a little weird. Zach was weird in a more innocent way, so they worked together. OP's parents were great friends with Charlie's parents, so their brother and Charlie spent a lot of time together. A couple of months ago, Charlie told his parents that Zach had been essaying him for months. OP wasn't told the details, and that's all she knows about it. She threw up when she found out. She grew up with Charlie, and he's like a little brother to her. OP doesn't see Charlie's family anymore, and Charlie's parents are getting a divorce. OP says she has always been there to defend her brother against their parents, but she can't bring herself to do it anymore. Anytime he says something, she feels disgusted. But at the same time, she does want him to get help, and no one deserves the neglect he gets from their parents. He's forced to stay in his room all day, every day now. She does not know what to do. This is all she has ever known. She has been away and at college for the last 6 months, so it has done wonders for her stress levels, but she still thinks about all these things on a daily basis. Zach is 16 now. She worries about what he's going to become. What if he turns violent? What if he tries to hurt their sister? Could she have done something when she was younger to fix him? I'm a bad person, stalker, narcissist, monster. 9 years ago, a deleted user on the Confession subreddit shared that he's not well. OP had no father. His father had died. OP got sick and was sick for years. He calls it the Big C. He was young back then, but now he's older and the rot set in. He's clean now, though. When he was 6 years old, he harmed his cousin's cat because he didn't like the attention it was getting from everyone else. He did it for weeks until he was caught. The cat is alive and it freezes in fear when he walks past it. He feels sick when he sees it. When he was 13, he bullied a young boy online because he made videos on YouTube that were getting quite popular. He didn't like the attention the boy was getting, which is a running theme here. He says he bullied him relentlessly until he stopped for a bit. The boy didn't deserve that, and he did nothing wrong. He admits that he obsessively follows women, stalking them online to find out where they work, live, and all about their personal lives. He has even hacked into their social media accounts if their passwords were easy enough. At times, when he's at his worst, he goes to where he thinks they might be and loiters, aimlessly lingering around without a purpose. That's all he does. He never confronts anyone or talks to them. They almost never notice him. And when they do, they think it's an innocent coincidence. Nothing happens as usual. OP loved some of them, or at least he thought so at the beginning anyways. He tries and tries, but they don't want to know. They don't want to know in the slightest. He reads the tips, he tries to be himself, he tries to be his opposite, and he tries to be the happy medium, but they don't want to know. They've got bigger fish to fry, so they never spare him a glance. He's a virgin apart from an encounter with a prostitute which he had when he was 19. He says she tasted like raw, perfumed meat. He was too young, and she didn't want him there. Of course she didn't. Why would she want him? She was as human as he is. He's worked in a school once and would go to the toilets during break to do you-know-what to students and fellow members of staff. He doesn't feel like he's on any grown-up woman's level. He feels like he's such a child. He's weak and ignorant. He feels so smart at times. He knows stuff, but he's never experienced anything beyond pain and failure. He also says he enjoys farting way too much. If you've smelled it, it's him. It's second only to wanking. He dreams of buying guns, walking into a public space, and using them. In his head, he will lead everyone on a wild goose chase and enact a reign of terror for weeks. Then they'd see him, and they'd see what they never saw. He doesn't want success anymore. He doesn't want love anymore, nor sex, no more money or family or friends. He never had most of them anyway, and he never will. He's too bad. He was born shitty and lazy, and he describes himself as half made up. He says that he should end it, but he's a coward. He's too selfish to go alone. He needs them all. He needs everyone to look at him, and as they lean in close, he will drag them all down to the pit he has made for himself. Everyone thinks he's so normal and nice, slightly awkward but decent. He's a monster. He's disgusting. They don't know what he thinks of them all. They don't know that he's a narcissist, a hateful, bitter, scared little man who would see them all dead at worst. He only sees them at their best when they're praising him, applauding him. He hates everyone. They all have each other, but who has he got? He's so ugly and weak, awkward and clumsy. He's desperate, self-obsessed and lazy. He has no job and he stinks. He knows he does. There's something festering in his skin. He tries to speak, but the words don't come out. He's got things to say, but they aren't in words. He repeats that he has no skills or talents. He should be locked up. Someone should find a means to halt his liberty. He goes to a therapist every week, but he doesn't mind being locked up. No, he doesn't mind. He says that's all. Rambling incoherence over. I killed my neighbor's dog, and I don't regret it one bit. The upcoming confession was shared 3 years ago by a deleted account. OP's neighbor had a dog in their yard. OP describes their dog as a huge thing. The dog barked like crazy whenever they saw any car, another dog, or another person near their yard. They never really cared about that dog or their neighbor for that matter. They never were a big dog person, and while they and their neighbor got along, they never had any deeper desire for a friendship with them. The neighbor never bothered them until their dog ran away, broke into OP's own yard, and killed their cat who was sleeping there. They would not give any detail about that, mostly because they didn't want to remember or describe that moment, but it was not a pretty sight. Their neighbor was extremely apologetic, but they didn't get rid of their dog. Afterwards, they begged OP to not call animal control, and they agreed, because at that moment, they were too shocked to want to do anything other than gather what was left of their cat and give them a proper burial. Today, OP wishes that they did call animal control and had their neighbor's mutt put down. Their cat was a good cat. All it did was sleep, eat, and play. It never even scratched anyone. They miss the cat's meowing. They miss it getting all the bugs from the outside and bringing them into their house. They miss their cat sleeping in their bed, and they miss their cat waking up in the middle of the night for whatever reason. OP misses how they would share a bed, and their cat would sneak under the blankets when it was cold. They just miss it. Waking up every day without their little buddy and knowing that the monster who killed it was still around, still barking whenever they walked by its yard, was the worst feeling ever. So they did something about it. They waited for quite some time to pass after the incident, mostly because they were waiting until more and more of their neighbors got irritated or complained about the dog, just so that they wouldn't be the most obvious suspect. It didn't take too long. They weren't the first person in the neighborhood that the dog tormented, and they sure as hell weren't the last. They wanted to get rid of that dog, but didn't want it to suffer more than it should. So, they just got a big steak, filled it up with probably too much rat poison, and then they threw it into the dog's yard in the middle of the night. The dog ate it all, not leaving anything behind. It took some time, but by the end of the week, that dog was dead. Their neighbor was inconsolable since they really loved that rotten mutt, and while OP gave them their condolences, they couldn't help but think their neighbor deserved it. It's been some time since then. Their neighbor got another dog, but this time it's a tiny poodle, which they don't let out in the yard for too long. OP still mourns their old cat. It was the biggest source of happiness in their life for a long time after all. But they managed to get another kitty after it followed them home. They are really happy. They don't regret what they did and would do it all over again if necessary. Anonymous confession from a forum. Monkey torture. This is an anonymous confession from an online forum. It's one of many which were made. Anon states that they think they've confessed to this before, but they've done more now. They cannot stand the sight of a monkey, not a chimpanzee or a gorilla, but the smaller ones, monkeys. Something about their little faces and their flailing hands makes them cause him to want to wring the life out of them. He remembers being young, not more than 7 or 8 years old, and going on a school trip to the zoo. There was some little pygmy marmoset in a cage with a mate. He remembers suddenly being overcome with the urge to take the little one out of the cage and just make it scream while the other one watched. Fucking psycho. He was afraid for a long time, worried that he was a psychopath who was going to torture animals. But no, until recently he has never harmed another living thing. He loves his pets and his kids beyond words, but monkeys just fill him with a dark, vile purpose. He previously linked to the Poor Baby Monkey YouTube series, where baby monkeys were in a foreign zoo and being videotaped by unsympathetic or even like-minded people. The monkeys were half dead, starved little things that trembled in a font of a sadistic pleasure. Anon has often fantasized about getting a little helper monkey and reenacting the Faces of Death scene. He implies that we should know what scene he's talking about, and then he adds that he wouldn't eat it afterwards, which likely refers to the monkey. He says that he didn't come back to post the idea, but rather because he wanted to confess that he has actually done it. He lives in South California, a pretty plain area, but he's close to the border where things are lax. He found a man online who shared the same feelings towards monkeys as him. They shared all sorts of videos. Anon says that he found the majority abhorrent, but the monkey stuff is top-notch. They both agreed to meet, and the guy agreed to sell his mother's helper monkey to Anon. Anon states that they would then go off and live out the fantasy. He decided to do it, and he told his missus that he's getting an old friend who was coming north, and they were going out hiking. Anon and the guy met up, and there it was in the cage, a tiny little thing. They drove out into the desert for an hour or two, chatting about what they would do to it. When they reached the destination, they harmed the monkey in various ways. Sometimes he feels guilty. It was just a dumb animal, it didn't need to suffer, but then that dark pit rises up in his throat, and he remembers just how much he hates monkeys. He doesn't think he will do it again, but he just wanted to confess to it and to anyone else out there who hates monkeys just as much as he does. Anon also adds that, yes, it does feel as good as anyone thinks it does, implying that he had no regrets whatsoever at the end of his admission. I have been secretly blackmailing my rapist for the past year. This next confession was shared 7 years ago by a user going under the name of Costa Costa Monster. About 10 months ago, she had a party. Near the end of the party, she was extremely drunk. She barely even remembered what happened, but she remembered that when everyone else left her apartment, a guy who showed up at the party was on top of her on the couch. OP was slipping in and out of consciousness. She knew he had assaulted her and that she was too drunk to even respond to it. She woke up with a bruise on her face and blood on her trousers. The assailant was some guy who she didn't really know, but he came with a friend. His name was Kevin. She had security camera footage of her apartment, and she looked at it the next morning. Obvious footage showed him doing it. It was horribly difficult for her to watch that video. He kept on repeating, "Nobody else is here. Nobody else is here," in that video, and she was crying in the beginning. She then contacted him on Facebook, saying that she knew it was him. He acted confused, so she told him she had a camera in her apartment at all times and that there was a very, very clear video of what was going on. She told him she was going to the police. But OP didn't go to the police. She felt shame and embarrassment. She felt this horrible thing that everybody was going to treat her differently if they knew she was violently assaulted. She remembered when one of her closest friends was assaulted in college and everyone sort of treated her like a trauma victim for a year. Her friend also told her how horrible it felt going to the police and everything. Everyone treated her differently. Like just how people treat someone when they lose a loved one, being overly sensitive and quiet because they don't want to possibly trigger some bad feelings. It was like that with her friend, and for a really long time. She remembered her friend crying to her about how she wished she had never even reported the assault or told anyone she got assaulted. Her friend said she hated the idea of people constantly feeling like they had to walk on thin ice around her, and that she hated the idea of people thinking of her as a rape victim. OP did not want to be like that girl. She waited a month. She supposed the guy must have been really scared, thinking the cops were going to come to his door at any moment. Instead, she messaged him, telling him to give her money or else she would report the assault. He worked in real estate, and he was constantly posting stuff about how he was making good deals and tons of money. OP then got $400 wired to her through PayPal, all from him, just so she keeps quiet. OP says that she did this a lot. She'd ask twice a month for money, usually not $400, but typically like $100 to $250 each time. Eventually, they made a deal where he gave her $500 flat a month. She then upped it to $600 2 months ago. She says that she could probably up it even more, and she probably should. She also told him that if she ever heard that he assaulted anyone else or was creepy to any other girl, she would send the video to the police right away. She was not sure if this was related, but maybe 2 months after he started paying her, he posted on Facebook about how he quit drinking for good. He shared that he was an alcoholic for years, which made him do so-called terrible things to hurt other people. OP couldn't help but think he was referring to her. She felt bad. She honestly did. Not for him, but for the fact that not enough punishment was being inflicted on him. She thought about how he should be serving prison time for what he did. But at the same time, she also could not stand the idea of admitting that she was assaulted. To have other people know what happened to her made her feel horrible inside. It's like this horrible mixture of shame and embarrassment. There were no updates or comments made by the account.